In early October 2025, the familiar night sky, long accustomed to its repetitive motions, was suddenly torn open by a strange signal. In remote observatories, where massive telescopes gazed at the heavens like unblinking eyes, scientists for the first time detected the bizarre appearance of a luminous speck, one unlike any object ever recorded. It was 3I divided by Atlas. Neither an ordinary comet nor a meteor trapped forever in its familiar orbit around the Sun, Atlas announced itself from the very first moment with a name that carried both awe and dread. As if the universe had opened a door, humanity was utterly unprepared to step through. That faint bluish glow spread gradually across the night sky, leaving its first witnesses breathless. It was not the dazzling, firework-like explosion of a common comet, nor the silent white dot of an asteroid slipping past. Its color seemed ambiguous blue like eternal ice, yet tinged with emerald as though pulsing with a hidden heartbeat. Seasoned astronomers, hardened by years of rare phenomena, suddenly felt like wanderers lost before the question, why now? And why, among countless celestial bodies, should a vagabond from distant space appear shrouded in such an enigmatic halo? The astonishment quickly spread beyond the cold control rooms. Across the global observation network, reports flooded in, creating a fragmented yet tangled mosaic. No one could claim they were looking at anything familiar. Atlas's orbit did not align with any known local body. It did not follow cycles, did not obey the numerical ratios charted in astronomical tables over centuries. Its path curved toward the Sun, yet it showed no intention of staying. Instead, it cut through the solar system like a blade, leaving behind a greenish trail forever etched in memory. Curiosity reached its peak when the most advanced telescopes began capturing preliminary spectrographic data. Absorption and emission lines revealed signs that defied explanation. Elements we thought we knew appeared in distorted ratios, hinting at an origin beyond every standard we recognize. With each new stream of data, wonder flared again, yet alongside it came a shadow of unease. If this resembled nothing ever known, then it belonged to a realm human minds had never touched. And when confronted with the unknown, curiosity always walks hand in hand with fear. On that first October night, many could not look away from the sky. Atlas seemed to claim the center, even though most of humanity remained unaware. Only the scientific community stood at the shoreline of this tidal wave. Amid flickering screens of shifting numbers, a dreadful silence filled the rooms. They realized what they were watching was not merely a visitor passing by, but possibly a voiceless message from the vast universe itself. Yet what did the message mean? A gentle reminder that we are not alone, or a cold warning that our existence is but a speck in a grander play? It was this very ambiguity that gnawed at the minds of those quietly following the green arc now traced across the heavens. Atlas had become a living question, a colossal mystery no one dared say would bring hope or disaster. The longer it was observed, the more anxiety seeped in, as though the cosmos had posed a riddle whose answer would decide the fate of humankind. That October night, the thick tomes of astronomy suddenly felt obsolete. Only one undeniable truth remained. We were face to face with a stranger from the galactic edge, and no one yet knew what it carried within. As the early days of October passed, attention toward 3I divided by Atlas was no longer the privilege of a few isolated observatories. The flood of incoming data from telescopes across the globe had turned Atlas into a shared mystery of all humanity. Scientific reports, once dry and often ignored, suddenly became the headline of every morning. And it all stemmed from one unsettling detail that astronomers were forced to admit. Atlas's light followed no known rule. Its brightness not only fluctuated in cycles but shifted abruptly, as if an invisible hand were adjusting its luminous heartbeat. The pulses of blue light, streaked with flashes of green, came in waves long enough to send chills down the spines of those monitoring the data. For in the silent cosmos, rhythm rarely signals anything simple. It almost always points to processes far more complex than mere ice sublimating into space. Day by day, the curiosity of the scientific community grew stronger, but along with it came a creeping unease. Some researchers proposed that Atlas might contain exotic compounds that vaporized at far lower temperatures than anything we knew, creating the illusion of constantly changing light. But this hypothesis was quickly dismantled by new spectrographic readings. Bands of red and violet lines appeared where no familiar ice or metal could account for them. It was chemistry from some distant stellar nursery, beyond the reach of human imagination. And the less we could comprehend, the smaller and more fragile humanity seemed against the vastness of space. In closed conference rooms, where scientists from multiple nations gathered around giant screens, the atmosphere grew far heavier than the initial thrill had suggested. They knew science was always a journey of questions and answers, but this time the questions piled up while no answer could fill the void. Atlas was not just defying formulas and models, it was defying the very belief that the universe had, in some sense, become knowable. Gaps in knowledge revealed themselves like cracks in what had seemed a solid wall, leaving many shuddering. Meanwhile, beyond the academic sphere, news of Atlas began leaking into the public. Newspapers and TV stations seized upon the mysterious angle of the phenomenon, inadvertently spreading unease. Graphic renderings of Atlas's shifting glow appeared all over social media, sparking comments filled with both awe and dread. Some compared it to the green heart of an ancient god beating in the dark. Others claimed it was the torch of an alien civilization. There was no evidence to support such claims, yet the collective mood was nonetheless tainted by anxiety. Humanity has always feared most the things it cannot define. The unease deepened when independent research groups announced that Atlas's orbital decay showed abnormal patterns. Instead of following a smooth, predictable course, radar data registered subtle oscillations, like invisible nudges pushing against it. These might have been measurement errors, or chemical outbursts from within the body itself. But in the collective imagination, they immediately sparked darker scenarios. What if Atlas was more than ice and rock? What if some process was actively shaping its rhythm and its path? Were we facing a natural phenomenon never before explained, or a mystery that lay beyond the reach of science altogether? With each passing day, humanity's emotions toward Atlas stretched tighter between two extremes: overwhelming wonder at a miraculous object, and a quiet dread that inside that shimmering glow hid a cold message. By early October 2025, Atlas was no longer just a presence in the sky. It had become a presence in the minds of millions, planting a question no one dared answer. Were we witnessing a miracle or a warning? By the second week of October, Atlas was no longer the subject of scattered observations. It had become the centerpiece of an unprecedented global debate. In online conferences linking thousands of researchers from Europe, the Americas, Asia, and even observatories in the Southern Hemisphere, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. One faction insisted Atlas was simply an interstellar object carrying the chemical fingerprint of a distant star system. They reassured that everything could be explained by science, with more data, with more time. But the opposing faction refused to accept pure randomness. They pointed to the fluctuating light, the irregular orbit, the bizarre chemical ratios, details they believed could not merely be the play of nature. To them, Atlas was an unknown deliberately delivered by the universe itself. The media quickly seized on this divide, igniting it into a storm of sensational headlines. Major newspapers ran titles like "Atlas an Alien Message" or "Interstellar Object or Cosmic Machine." Though based on no verified evidence, those words had the power to sweep away public reason. People in many countries turned their gaze skyward, searching for that faint greenish glow, then drowning themselves in speculation. Some saw it as an omen, others trembled, convinced it was a harbinger of doom. In that uncertainty, anxiety crept into cafe conversations and spread through endless threads of social media comments. Governments, wary of phenomena that could incite panic, were forced to step in. Several issued official statements declaring Atlas posed no threat to Earth, stressing its safe orbit hundreds of millions of kilometers away. Yet those reassurances only deepened suspicion. If there truly was nothing unusual, why were scientific councils convening emergency meetings? Why were close-up images so heavily vetted before release? The more that was withheld, the darker the public's imagination became. The truth was, no one staring into radar screens or telescopes could claim to fully understand Atlas, and that void became fertile soil for fear. Meanwhile, fresh data kept fueling waves of debate. One research team announced they had discovered abnormal decay in the dust cloud surrounding Atlas. According to them, it might be the result of incredibly violent chemical reactions, suggesting Atlas harbored compounds never before seen in the solar system. But only hours later, another group countered, arguing the effect could just as easily be the result of solar-wind interaction. Yet even in their denial, their voices carried unease, for they themselves were not entirely convinced by their own reasoning. These debates, instead of offering answers, only revealed the limits of human knowledge. On the social level, the psychological effect was undeniable. People began sharing strange dreams in which Atlas appeared as a massive eye watching Earth. Online communities formed around the belief that the shifting light carried intent, as if it were trying to communicate. Amateur videos capturing supposed flashes spread like wildfire, though most were nothing more than optical illusions or camera interference. But under the weight of collective unease, few cared for simple explanations. Many wanted to believe there was a deeper truth behind Atlas, one that scientists were deliberately hiding. Within this chaos, a deeper fear began to take shape. It was not the fear that Atlas would collide with Earth. Calculations had confirmed it posed no direct danger. The fear came from what Atlas revealed, a gaping void in humanity's understanding. We could send spacecraft to Mars, track the tiniest asteroids, and yet, when faced with an object from beyond the solar system, we were confused, divided, and lost, as if we were back at the dawn of our species. That realization that human knowledge was still so fragile before the cosmos made many shiver involuntarily whenever they thought of Atlas. It was not merely a strange speck of light. It was a mirror reflecting the fragility of human intellect adrift in the boundless sea of space. The final days of mid-October unfolded under a heavy atmosphere. If, at the start of the month, Atlas had been a source of awe laced with curiosity, by now it had become a collective obsession. Across the world, public forums with scientists resembled philosophical debates more than straightforward scientific briefings. Instead of providing answers, Atlas only raised more questions. Why did its light fluctuate with such rhythm? Why was its chemical makeup inverted compared to every model we knew? Why had its orbit appeared precisely at the moment humanity was expanding its vision of the cosmos with our newest telescopes? Each question did not merely spark curiosity, but planted a lingering unease. Could coincidences ever align this perfectly? In many cities, community skywatching sessions turned into half-scientific, half-ritualistic events. People gathered in squares, set up amateur telescopes, and whispered as though witnessing a prophecy written in light. Children eagerly pointed upward, but in the eyes of adults there shimmered an indistinct fear. Some exclaimed that Atlas resembled a ship drifting through darkness, carrying the stories of a lost civilization. Others likened it to a crack on the mirror of the cosmos, signaling the fragility of humankind's world. These metaphors, though only attempts to give meaning to what was beyond understanding, spread with startling speed, plunging the emotional landscape of the globe into chaos. Between awe and thirst for knowledge, a quiet fear was beginning to take the upper hand. Among scientists, the sense of helplessness was equally clear. Each new measurement, rather than fortifying knowledge, undermined the foundations of what had once seemed certain. A team in Hawaii insisted they had detected strange magnetic oscillations near Atlas, while another in Chile dismissed them as mere instrument error. A German research institute reported anomalies in infrared emissions, but their counterparts in Japan recorded no such thing. Instead of advancing toward truth, humanity seemed lost in a labyrinth of contradictory data. That ambiguity paradoxically made Atlas more frightening than any celestial body ever documented. At least comets and asteroids obeyed familiar rules. Atlas seemed to be writing a new book of physics, and no one knew which page to begin with. Anxiety gradually transformed into a collective obsession. On forums, apocalyptic scenarios flourished. Some claimed Atlas was a seed planted in the solar system, waiting to awaken. Others believed its green glow was encoded signals, a language still far beyond our ability to decipher. Governments tried to stamp out the rumors, but the more they denied, the more the public believed something was being concealed. By its very silence, Atlas had inadvertently turned all of humanity into creators of their own fear, fueled by imagination. On the night of October 20th, in regions where skies were darkest, Atlas suddenly flared brighter than usual. Thousands witnessed it firsthand, and the moment immediately dominated every news broadcast. No one knew why it blazed and then dimmed so quickly, like a sudden breath. Yet in that fleeting eruption, human emotions spiked to the limit. Awe so intense it chilled the skin, curiosity so consuming it bordered on obsession, and anxiety so sharp hearts raced. Scientists labeled it a natural fluctuation, but millions of others were convinced it was a blink, the blink of a stranger watching us from the shadows. As October drew to a close, Atlas continued its silent journey through the solar system. But for humanity, it had already left behind an indelible emotional legacy. From the initial wave of wonder to burning curiosity, to unease, ambiguity, and mounting fear, all of it blended into a strange psychological symphony. Atlas did not crash into Earth, nor did it trigger any physical catastrophe. Yet it collided directly with human awareness, forcing us to face ourselves. Confronted with a peculiar green speck, we realized the control we believed we held over the cosmos was only a fragile illusion. Atlas had become a mirror, reflecting who we are, how far our knowledge truly reaches, and whether we are ready to confront secrets that lie forever beyond our control. By mid-October 2025, as the first autumn leaves drifted down from trees in bustling cities on Earth, high above, farther, colder, more remote, the sky was writing an entirely different chapter. 3. I divided by Atlas. The silent wanderer from the edge of the universe was no longer just a distant name confined to scientific reports. It had become a strange beacon etched into the night sky, startling ordinary eyes long accustomed to the steady rhythm of the moon and stars. At first, only giant telescopes recorded its unusual data, but soon, even ordinary people, on moonless nights, whispered that a turquoise-green streak was gliding across the horizon, like a mysterious scar carved into the black canvas of the cosmos. Each night, Atlas was like a wordless storyteller, spinning suspense with its unpredictable glow. On some nights, it shone so brilliantly that it felt as though the entire sky had awakened, making people draw a sharp breath, trembling with the sense that some cosmic upheaval was about to unfold. Yet on other nights, it faded to a mere glimmer, like the dying lantern of a wandering soul. It was this very irregularity that kept scientists awake for countless nights, eyes fixed on flickering monitors, hearts racing with every sudden fluctuation. Whenever Atlas blazed unexpectedly, it was not only instruments that recorded the data. The very hearts of its watchers seemed clenched by an invisible hand. A vague dread stirred. If it was not random, then what was controlling it? And if some hidden hand existed in the shadows, what was its true intention? Yet amid all the suspense and anxiety, there was also an undeniable emotion, breathless awe at Atlas's majestic beauty. Its cool yet explosive glow transformed the familiar sky into a completely different canvas, as if the universe had shed its quiet stillness to don a dazzling ceremonial robe. Every pulse of light, every flicker, every inexplicable variation carved into human consciousness, the truth that they were nothing but trembling dust before a colossal, ancient, and alien force. Gone were the static stars, gone was the old cycle of waxing and waning moons. There was only Atlas, a lone dancer moving across the infinite ballroom of space, leaving behind melodies no one could hear, but everyone could feel. Those who witnessed it firsthand could not hide their shivers when recalling it. Some described Atlas as a cosmic lighthouse, sending out a silent but urgent signal, forcing the fragile little ship called Earth to lift its gaze. Others admitted in fear that it felt like a quiet green eye observing from afar, a gaze piercing through clouds, forests, and cities alike. The longer they looked, the more it seemed they were not merely watching a celestial body, but being watched, judged even as if the very existence of humankind was being weighed in silence. And in laboratories, where reports piled high, the atmosphere was no different. Data poured in at dizzying speed, but no one truly understood it. Each chart, each spectrum, each measurement suggested something unsettling, as though every new line of information revealed a wider darkness. Even the steeliest astronomers admitted to feeling a heavy unease, not because Atlas threatened to strike Earth, but because it was pressing against the outermost edges of human understanding. At that fragile boundary between knowing and not knowing, dread seeped down to the marrow. Atlas, the blue-green wanderer, had forced the world to stay awake, to tremble, and to confront a truth impossible to deny. We were no longer detached observers, but the ones being observed, challenged, stirred by the cosmos itself. In the following days of October 2025, the atmosphere inside observatories big and small across the globe was as tense as awaiting a verdict. Hour by hour, telescopes streamed back new lines of data, and with every new entry, the hearts of those reading them tightened. The light spectra from 3I divided by Atlas revealed utterly abnormal signs. Spectral lines usually associated with ice, dust, or common metals were replaced by chaotic, tangled patterns like a foreign language absent from the scientific dictionary. Each time a research team announced findings, the community trembled. Why was carbon dioxide showing up in such absurdly dominant ratios? Why was water, the most basic component of comets and icy bodies, reduced to nearly nothing? Why did the infrared emissions from Atlas carry the fingerprint of a molecular structure never seen before? This very strangeness pushed the global mood into a state of relentless suspense, like the quickened heartbeat of a patient, unaware of what illness they carried. Each scientific report, instead of offering answers, only magnified the anxiety. Some likened it to opening a door in search of light, only to find endless corridors stretching deeper into darkness. The further humanity went, the more lost it felt. Atlas was not simply a celestial body. It was a labyrinth of data, a test of intellect, where every familiar map of knowledge proved useless. Yet alongside this suffocating tension was a spectacle that left observers speechless. The sheer grandeur of the phenomenon. Close-up images captured by the most advanced telescopes showed Atlas releasing hazy bursts of light, like columns of blue smoke rising from some far-off world. Its body was shrouded in darkness, but its glowing trails stretched hundreds of thousands of kilometers, like a celestial shawl draped across the heavens. Just to look at it was enough to make one shiver. The beauty here was no longer simple cosmic scenery. It was a haunting beauty, majestic and terrifying at once. Like a storm of light, humanity could not decide whether to worship or to flee. In many cities, amateur groups with small telescopes also recorded Atlas. They shared images online, and within hours, millions of views had turned Atlas into a global icon. But instead of joy at such a connection, the prevailing feeling was tension. In every frame, Atlas looked like the central figure standing on a stage, while all of humanity sat in the audience, hearts pounding, marveling yet trembling. Some people wept when they saw its pale green light slipping through the night clouds, because it made them feel as though Earth itself was just a tiny train station, and Atlas was the passing train of destiny, never stopping, never announcing its arrival. In the scientific community, emergency meetings continued. They compared data from observatories in the southern and northern hemispheres, but the results only deepened the contradictions. Some recorded changes in brightness cycling every 7 hours, while others saw entirely random fluctuations. Some argued it was the effect of intense sublimation as Atlas neared the Sun. Others rejected this outright, insisting no evaporation model could account for such rhythmic variation. In these disagreements, the sense of suspense only spread wider. No one wanted to say it aloud, but everyone felt it. Atlas was the one in control. Humanity, despite all its advanced instruments, was reduced to helpless spectators, chasing flashes like children chasing fireflies in the dark. On the night of October 15th, when Atlas flared once again, observatories simultaneously recorded its brightness surging to 3 times the predicted level. Emergency bulletins went out, and the entire world held its breath. No one knew what had caused it to blaze so suddenly. In that moment, suspense spread like a storm. Hearts raced, hands trembled, eyes widened. And yet, alongside the fear, came awe so overwhelming it left people speechless. Never before had humanity witnessed a cosmic performance so grand. Atlas was not merely passing through the solar system, it was blazing through imagination, surging beyond emotional limits, leaving behind a trail of tension and wonder deeply etched into the collective mind. As October drew to a close, the suspense was no longer confined to laboratories or giant telescopes. It had spilled into the streets, into apartments, into family conversations. On nightly news broadcasts, alongside political and economic updates, images of 3i divided by Atlas appeared again and again, an emblem of both fear and wonder. Television stations replayed videos recorded by ordinary citizens, a faint green streak flickering across the black sky. With every broadcast, millions of hearts began to beat faster, trembling with anxiety and tightening with awe. Governments, wary of the threat of mass panic, held press conferences across the world. Spokespeople repeated over and over that Atlas posed no direct danger to Earth, that its hundreds of millions of kilometers in distance formed an absolute safety buffer. Yet those reassurances failed to erase the tension spreading everywhere. The truth was, even the officials' voices wavered. You could hear hesitation in every sentence, see their eyes flicker toward the screen behind them, where that green streak continued to pulse, as though mocking every attempt at explanation. Within the scientific community, online symposiums turned into heated debates. One camp remained firm. Atlas was simply an interstellar object with strange chemistry, and science would eventually find the answers. But the other camp argued the rhythmic fluctuations of its light could not be ignored. They raised the question that silenced the entire forum. What if this isn't just physics? What if it's a signal? And if it is a signal, are we ready to answer? Sigh. That hypothesis alone thickened the air until it felt as though an invisible hand had closed around every chest. While scientists argued, the public was swept up in a tide of contradictory emotions. In many cities, thousands gathered in plazas to watch Atlas. Massive screens streamed live images from telescopes, turning the phenomenon into a kind of modern ritual. When Atlas flared, the crowds erupted not in joy, but in a roar that mingled terror with reverence. Eyes glistened with tears, not from grief but from overwhelming awe at the grandeur of the cosmos. People realized they were living in a rare moment, a moment when the universe peeled back its veil to reveal a secret far beyond human knowledge. On social media, Atlas became the absolute center of attention. Blurry sky photos were shared millions of times. Status updates flooded in some prayers, some cries of fear, some bursts of naive optimism. Some believed Atlas was an omen of the apocalypse, a trigger for uncontrollable events. Others saw it as a gift from the universe, proof that humanity was not alone. However interpreted, one truth could not be denied. Atlas had forced humanity to pause, to look up, to feel the heartbeat of the cosmos flowing through their veins. And in that intersection between anxious suspense and breathless awe, a shared mood emerged. Humanity was standing before a door, and no one knew what it would open to. Atlas not only made the world afraid, it also made millions realize the vast universe still held countless forces beyond control. Every flash of green, every irregular shift in its orbit, became a drumbeat, urging us onward, tense, breathless, and impossible to ignore. On the night of the 25th of October 2025, Atlas suddenly flared with a brightness many times greater than ever before. Telescopes across the planet simultaneously recorded a surge of light that exceeded every prediction. In that instant, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. In crowded plazas, throngs of people tilted their heads upward in absolute silence. All laughter, chatter, and whispers dissolved, leaving only the pounding rhythm of hearts echoing in every chest. Atlas, with its dazzling green-blue glow, seemed like a cosmic heart beating thunderously above the sky. Suspense spread like an invisible tsunami, sweeping across every border, binding all of humanity in a single shared feeling, breathless fear of what might come next. Inside control centers, flashing red alerts on monitors drew cold sweat from experts' brows. Every system reported abnormal changes in Atlas's brightness, trajectory, and magnetic field. The data no longer matched any model ever built. One researcher blurted out, "We are watching an object that doesn't follow familiar laws." That remark, though uttered in the heat of the moment, spread like wildfire on social media, striking into the boiling core of public dread. Humanity has always feared the unknown most, and Atlas had now become the very emblem of absolute uncertainty. It shone, it shifted, it defied, but no one knew why. Amid the flood of fear, there remained something that left people choked with awe, the sheer majesty of the sight. Atlas's turquoise glow washed across the heavens, turning clouds into shimmering ribbons. Photographers who captured the moment admitted they had never seen anything so magnificent. The sky became a surreal painting, a colossal streak slashing across it, bathing entire cities in unearthly light. People trembled in fear even as tears welled from emotion. Atlas, by its very presence, had transformed anxiety into a ritual of smallness, bowing before the infinite cosmos. After the flare, a torrent of theories emerged. Some scientists suggested it was a sudden release of trapped gases, a rare but natural event. Others dismissed this, insisting no physical cycle could explain such abrupt intensity. Amid the arguments, the public felt only one thing: suspense had never been greater. Everyone carried the same unanswered question in their minds. What is Atlas trying to say to us? Those words trying to say reflected the world's shifting mindset. Humanity was beginning to see Atlas not as a lifeless chunk of ice and rock, but as a character, a being with intent. And when a celestial body becomes a dialogue partner, the anxiety multiplies 100-fold. In the days that followed, even as Atlas dimmed again, humanity could not settle. The suspense lingered in every upward glance. The unease came not only from data that failed to fit models, but from the realization that control was never ours to begin with. Atlas had forced humanity to face a truth. We could calculate comet orbits, predict eclipses, launch spacecraft beyond Earth. But before a visitor from the galactic edge, all that knowledge was as fragile as paper tossed into the wind. And so, by the end of October 2025, humanity's emotions converged into a strange paradox, suffocating suspense and overwhelming fear, yet at the same time, reverence so profound it bordered on the sacred. Atlas was both a vague threat and a testament to a grandeur beyond words. It had become a mirror, reflecting both humanity's fragility and its burning hunger to understand. As its green light faded toward the horizon, no one could say what the future would bring, but everyone knew one thing. From that moment on, humanity would never look at the sky the same way again. Atlas had etched itself into the collective memory, the memory of breathless suspense, of fear spreading wide, and of awe before a universe far more magnificent than imagination could grasp. As October came to a close, the skies of the world seemed somehow transformed. 3I divided by Atlas, the silent wanderer from the edge of the galaxy, entered a new stage of its journey. And from this point it no longer stirred only suspense or fear. It began to overwhelm humanity with a kind of wonder never before felt. On the night of October 31st, while much of the world was still immersed in noisy festivities, in places where the heavens were clear, Atlas erupted into a spectacle of light so extraordinary that no one could look away. Its enchanting blue glow stretched across the sky like a luminous ribbon, making even the most familiar stars fade into insignificance. For the first time, people felt that a celestial body was not merely passing by, but transforming the night itself into a ballroom of light for its own dance. Scientific reports noted an unprecedented surge in brightness, far exceeding even the most cautious forecasts. The spectra emitted by Atlas were no longer just jagged, alien lines. They blossomed into a dazzling canvas, bands of color twisting around one another, as though the universe itself were composing music in light. Veteran researchers, long accustomed to the cold detachment of numbers, fell silent as they stared at the graphs. No one could bring themselves to say this was mere physical chance, for the spectacle no longer stopped at reason, it pierced into the heart. With its surreal brilliance, Atlas had turned science into poetry, astronomy into a spiritual journey. The public, once watching with cautious eyes, now erupted in emotion. In remote villages, children rushed outside, pointing skyward and laughing, their sparkling eyes reflecting that miraculous blue glow. In great cities, where electric lights usually drowned out the stars, Atlas cut through every artificial veil, leaving behind a streak so vivid it stole the breath away. Drivers pulled over to the roadside to gaze, lovers clasped hands and whispered in awe. Elders sat by their windows, eyes blurred with tears, as if they were witnessing a miracle unfold before them. Across the globe, humanity shared the same unifying emotion, wonder so profound it left them speechless. And from that wonder, another layer of feeling unfurled, mystery, and a strange kind of poetry. For this was not the dry light of science, it was light that told stories. It did not merely shine, it danced, it sang, it resonated like an unseen symphony. Some poets described Atlas as a blossom blooming in the heart of the cosmos, each petal a trembling green-blue pulse, swaying in the invisible winds of space. Others likened it to a solitary dancer, draped in a gown of azure silk, spinning across an endless ballroom where all of humanity watched in silence. On philosophical forums, some even argued that Atlas was a mirror of the collective soul, forcing humanity to stop, to listen, to remember that the world still held mysteries beyond the reach of reason's language. In the first days of November, as Atlas continued to blaze fiercely, the sense of awe escaped the boundaries of laboratories and transformed into a cultural phenomenon. Composers wrote symphonies, titled The Light of Atlas. Painters filled canvases with swaths of blue. Writers penned stories that imagined it as a time-traveling guest, sent to remind humankind of both the fragility and beauty of existence. Yet above all interpretations, one undeniable truth stood out. Atlas had ignited in the human heart a strange fusion, astonishment so overwhelming it left one breathless, and mystery so poetic it made the soul melt. It was no longer just an astronomical event, it had become a cosmic song, a flower of the night, a miracle written in light. On the night of November 2nd, Atlas continued to ascend in a spectacle of light that astronomers described as so irrational it was beautiful. Through high-powered telescopes, Observers saw vast streams of blue radiance spilling out from its surface, stretching hundreds of thousands of kilometers, ethereal as mist, yet sharp as blades of light slicing through space. The dust cloud that once seemed like a shapeless veil transformed into a colossal curtain, reflecting the glow and creating ghostly halos, like layered windows opening toward another world. People gazed and whispered that Atlas was nothing less than a moving cathedral of light, its spectral columns rising straight from the heart of the void. The awe now came not only from Atlas's brilliance, but from the way it forced humanity to discard old definitions. Science might label it a violent sublimation of exotic compounds. Philosophy might frame it as a symbol of existence's fragility. But in the direct presence of its glow, when the light fell across the upturned faces of those who watched, language collapsed into inadequacy. Only one sensation remained. We were standing before a living poem, written by the unseen hand of the universe. A poem without words, only light resonating like music swelling across infinite space. All around the globe, small communities began turning the act of watching Atlas into a ritual. In a mountain village, elders and children gathered around a fire, sitting silently as the blue light spread across the heavens. They told one another it was the lantern of the cosmos, guiding humankind back to forgotten memories. In a great coastal city, thousands filled the beaches, flying kites into the night, their shimmering sails glinting under Atlas's light as though in conversation with it. In remote monasteries, monks sat in meditation, declaring Atlas a sacred symbol, a cosmic breath sent down to awaken the human soul. Regardless of religion or culture, all shared the same feeling, astonishment and reverence, as if Atlas had become a new star of faith in the night sky. Inside research institutes, the mood shifted as well. Though scientists still buried themselves in data, many admitted they felt as though they were watching a colossal dancer moving across the ballroom of the cosmos. Each spectral variation, each orbital tremor, resembled a graceful spin, a subtle bow, both enchanting and unfathomable. An elderly astronomer in Chile murmured to a colleague, "Atlas is the greatest artist I've ever seen. It's performing a dance we cannot understand, only feel." Far from being dismissed as fanciful, his words drew nods of agreement, for they all knew there are moments when science must bow before the poetry of the universe. That sense of poetry deepened as Atlas began to pulse with irregular rhythms. At times, its light thundered like the drums of war, making the hearts of onlookers pound in synchrony. At other times, it softened, dimming to a dreamy whisper that lulled the world into a trance. Within those cycles of brightness and shadow, people felt Atlas was no longer merely matter. It was a living presence, breathing, singing, telling a story in the language of stars. And though the story could not be deciphered, it reached into the deepest recesses of human feeling. Wonder so overwhelming it left one dizzy, and beauty so dreamlike it made one believe they were wide awake, dreaming in daylight. As Atlas continued to erupt in light during the first nights of November, the world's reaction reached a level no ordinary language could capture. In Paris, thousands poured onto the Champs-Élysées, crowding beneath the city lights, searching for a patch of sky dark enough. When Atlas flared, the cheers that burst forth resembled a music festival, but then dissolved instantly into absolute silence. Everyone simply stared upward, eyes wet, hearts pounding. In New York, among the skyscrapers, office workers abandoned their desks, climbing to rooftops together, standing spellbound as a streak of blue carved across the sky like a mysterious blade. In Tokyo, hundreds of thousands lined the banks of the Sumida River, silent as if at an ancient festival. Only this time, there were no fireworks, but a cosmic symphony of light spilling from the far edge of the galaxy. The shared emotion everywhere was the same: astonishment, awe, and a swelling sense of poetry. People began to call Atlas the world's common lantern, a symbol that transcended all boundaries of language, culture, and religion. Journalists described it as the first cosmic ritual attended by all of humanity. There was no soundtrack, no narration, only Atlas's blue radiance shining down, binding billions of people in a single sacred moment. A world divided by borders suddenly looked toward the same point, beating with the same heart. Inside research labs, scientists still hunched over their data, but even they were not immune to the storm of emotion. A German researcher wrote in his journal, "I once believed science was the cure for superstition, but when Atlas flared across the night sky, I wept, not out of fear, not from exhaustion, but because its beauty was more than the heart could bear." An astronomer in Chile confessed, "I no longer feel like I'm studying it. I'm praying." Such admissions, rare in the rational world, began surfacing everywhere, as if Atlas was stripping away human roles and titles, reducing all to mere spectators, awed, silent, and small. The public, too, began to drape Atlas in layers of meaning. In South America, indigenous communities saw the light as a sign that their ancestors had returned. In Northern Europe, it was likened to the Milky Way awakened, a cosmic harp strummed into resonance. In Africa, tribes sang ancient songs, prayers woven into the belief that the blue light was a river of the heavens, carrying ancestral souls to peace. Different lands told different stories, yet all shared the same essence. The mystery and poetry of Atlas had become an invisible thread, binding memory, faith, and imagination into one. In great cities, artists began creating under the open sky. In London, a street violinist played in Trafalgar Square, his music following Atlas's pulses of light, moving listeners to tears. In Mexico City, painters sketched directly on sidewalks, flooding their canvases with shades of blue they called the breath of Atlas. In Seoul, a troupe of dancers spun in spontaneous rhythms, twirling in dialogue with the celestial performer above. Atlas, through nothing more than its presence, had turned the planet into a stage where art, science, and faith all bowed together. Yet beneath the layers of wonder and poetry lay another emotion, a suffocating awe, verging on fear. For when a distant body could stir the entire world with light alone, humanity was forced to ask, were they witnessing a random miracle or facing a message of greater magnitude? No one could answer. But in every quickened heartbeat, in every tear-filled gaze, everyone knew they were living through a moment destined for humanity's collective memory. A moment when Earth itself paused to watch a colossal dancer performing in light across the infinite ballroom of the cosmos. On the night of the 7th of November 2025, Atlas reached the peak of its miraculous performance. Telescopes recorded its brightness as dozens of times stronger than at the moment of its discovery. But numbers now were nothing more than shadows. Reality had outstripped all measurement. From the grasslands of Africa to the icy reaches of northern Europe, from the scattered islands of the Pacific to bustling metropolises, billions of people lifted their eyes to the sky and gasped in breathless wonder. Atlas did not simply shine, it exploded into its own galaxy, bending across the heavens as if an invisible door had opened, granting humanity a fleeting glimpse into a dreamlike realm of the cosmos. Those who witnessed it firsthand shared the same reaction. Awe so overwhelming it brought tears. Its blue radiance swept across the clouds, dyeing oceans and mountains alike in a color that seemed not of Earth. Children shouted that the sky was dreaming. The elderly whispered with trembling voices that they had never seen anything so beautiful in all their years. Language itself seemed to shatter before the sight. All that remained was a suffocating silence in which millions of hearts beat in rhythm with a distant celestial body. Through its light, Atlas had transformed the planet into a colossal temple, where all of humanity participated in a cosmic ritual. In the world of art, the event quickly became an inexhaustible source of inspiration. A composer in Vienna wrote a new symphony titled The Whispers of Atlas, turning its shifting light into surging melodies. In Rio de Janeiro, samba dancers spun through the streets, twirling to the pulses of brightness, as if in conversation with the celestial traveler. In Cairo, muralists painted vast city walls, transforming the blue glow into a symbol of the doorway between humanity and the infinite. Never before in history had a celestial body inspired art across the globe in unison. Atlas was no longer just a subject of research. It had become poetry running through the veins of civilization itself. Yet woven into the ecstasy was another layer, a mystery that left people both dreaming and trembling. Many believed the blue glow was a signal that Atlas carried within it an untold story. Philosophers argued it was a test from the universe, forcing humanity to confront the limits of its knowledge, to realize that in the vast galaxy we were still only apprentices. Some even described hearing an invisible sound when gazing at Atlas, not with their ears, but echoing in their minds. A slow, haunting music, stirring memories too ancient to name. Though no scientific evidence could confirm it, the mystery became an emotional truth, etched into the souls of millions. And then, when Atlas's brilliance softened, as it continued its cold journey through the solar system, something remarkable occurred. No one felt disappointment. Instead, the world collectively held on to the moment as a shared memory, a collective hymn. People asked each other, "Where were you when Atlas lit up the sky?" Children drew Atlas in their school sketchbooks. The elderly told their grandchildren how they wept beneath its glow. Scientists, even after returning to their dry data, carried within them an aftertaste that refused to fade. In this strange unanimity, a new understanding formed. Atlas had not merely passed by, it had left a permanent mark. By the first weekend of November, as the night sky returned to normal, Atlas still lingered, though faint. Yet in the human mind, it remained brilliant, immortal. People would continue to debate its nature, a rare physical phenomenon, or a message from the stars. But one truth was already clear. Atlas had opened a door, not a door to some distant planet, but one directly into the human heart, where awe, wonder, and an undying hunger for dreams resided. And from that moment on, whenever humanity looked up at the sky, it would no longer see only silent stars, but remember that there was once a night when the entire world stood beneath the blue radiance of a mysterious visitor and believed they had brushed against a cosmic dream. After the dazzling nights of early November, when Atlas no longer left humanity breathless with sheer beauty, a new phase began. A phase of scientific puzzlement, of intellectual unease, of questions without answers. On November 12, data from the world's leading telescopes revealed something strange. Atlas's trajectory was not following the calculated path. It was drifting not by much, only a few thousandths of a degree, but the drift repeated in a cycle, as if an invisible heartbeat were tugging at it. Scientists immediately dove into analysis, but the more they calculated, the more they checked, the more they felt the very foundations of their knowledge begin to shake. One camp argued it was the resonant pull of nearby planets. Another camp disagreed, proving that every parameter ruled out that possibility. Some experts suggested that violent outgassing on Atlas's surface could create an irregular thrust, but spectral data contradicted them. The outgassing was uneven, inconsistent, and could never repeat in such a rhythmic pattern. What lay before everyone was a paradox, and that paradox was like a thorn driven deep into the pride of modern science. If it isn't gravity, if it isn't outgassing, then what is it? That question echoed through every conference hall, but the answer slipped away like sand through open fingers. Reports were published one after another, only to be torn down just as quickly. One morning, a US research institute announced it had discovered a mathematical model explaining the orbital drift. By afternoon, a team in Japan released data that completely contradicted it. Each new paper became a spark, fueling the wildfire of confusion. Even the calmest members of the scientific community began to admit they felt trapped in a maze. Every corridor was a hypothesis, yet each one ended at the same wall of uncertainty. "We may be observing a type of object that has never existed in any of our theories," wrote an astronomer in Chile. His statement not only stirred debate but also sent a shiver through the world. Could Atlas be the first evidence of an entirely new chapter in physics? Meanwhile, the public was pulled into the whirlpool of contradictions. One day, the headlines screamed, "Atlas, pulled off course by mysterious force." The next day, the news reversed. Everything under control, nothing unusual. Ordinary people felt like they were the butt of a cruel joke. Who was right? Who was wrong? How could the brightest minds on Earth fail to reach the same conclusion? That uncertainty shook public trust. Some began to suspect that governments were deliberately concealing the truth. Others believed Atlas had slipped beyond humanity's grasp, and that modern science was only flailing in vain. At international press briefings, the air was heavy. Experts tried to maintain a facade of composure, but their eyes betrayed exhaustion. Journalists fired questions like arrows. Is Atlas being influenced by an unknown force? Are we confronting a new form of matter? No one could answer definitively. The only refrain was a dry, repeated chorus. We need more data. But even that line deepened the public's bewilderment. For the more data accumulated, the greater the ambiguity became. Atlas, instead of bringing knowledge, was sowing endless confusion, hanging over humanity like an unsolvable equation suspended in the sky. By mid-November, the human mindset had shifted. In early November, they had been intoxicated by Atlas's beauty. Now, they trembled at its mystery. Science, once the compass guiding humanity, had become a spinning needle, unable to point the way. People began to realize that the crucial question was no longer, how beautiful is it, but does it obey any law at all or none? And it was precisely that uncertainty that unleashed a storm of emotion. Minds twisted with restless questions, hearts fell into disarray, as if all of humanity had stepped into a colossal laboratory where no one knew where the light switch was. Just as research teams were still struggling with Atlas's orbital deviations, a new wave of spectral data arrived and pushed the confusion to another level. Spectral lines, the writing of the universe, where each band of light reveals the presence of an element, suddenly became distorted symbols no one could fully read. Instead of the steady ratios of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen found in every known comet, Atlas displayed a chaotic matrix. Carbon dioxide spiking at absurd levels, while water, the most common ingredient, had all but vanished. Some spectral lines didn't match any element ever recorded. It was a kind of foreign language, one that left many scientists admitting they felt like students staring at a blackboard crammed with equations, not knowing where to begin. Hypotheses were proposed in quick succession, only to be dismissed just as quickly. Some suggested Atlas was a fragment from a carbon-rich region of space, but if so, why was there no trace of water? Others speculated contamination during data collection, but when multiple independent observatories produced the same results, that excuse collapsed. Each theory was like a life raft, tossed out only to sink immediately in the sea of uncertainty. And so, questioning led not to knowledge but to dead ends, trapping the scientific community in what felt like a labyrinth without exits. The reports piled higher each day, but knowledge grew thinner. A European science bulletin claimed Atlas may contain exotic compounds never before seen in the solar system. Almost immediately, a team in the US countered, "We cannot assert anything without direct evidence." These debates spilled into the media until the public no longer knew what to believe. People read the headlines, listen to the news, and ask themselves, if the smartest minds on Earth can't agree, what can we trust? Faith in science didn't vanish, but it wavered violently, flickering like a candle caught in a storm. Inside the laboratories, the atmosphere was suffocating. Researchers accustomed to cold objectivity now carried tangled emotions. A few were thrilled, convinced this was an opportunity to open a new chapter of physics, but most only felt powerless, as if they were trying to listen to a symphony written in an alphabet they had never seen. "We are staring into a warped mirror of nature," one physicist exclaimed. "Every law is reflected at us in distortion, leaving us unable to tell what's real and what's illusion." His words spread quickly, becoming the motto of the moment. Atlas was no longer just an object of observation, it had become a mirror, exposing the narrow limits of human knowledge. That bewilderment seeped far beyond the experts, into the minds of millions. On social media, users joked that Atlas is playing a word puzzle with humanity. Others panicked, convinced it was proof of extraterrestrial matter, a form of energy we could never control. Whether expressed in fear or sarcasm, the underlying feeling was the same: uncertainty. No one knew what Atlas was, no one knew what it meant, and in that state, scientific inquiry, which had always been the guiding light, became a wavering flame, illuminating just enough to reveal the boundless fog ahead. By mid-November, as Atlas pressed deeper into the solar system, uncertainty had become the rhythm of the age. With every new batch of data, more questions emerged. But instead of moving closer to an answer, humanity seemed only to be spinning in circles within a vortex of doubt. Atlas, the blue wanderer, was no longer just a spectacular sight in the heavens. It had become a colossal question mark, hanging over the entire world, and the longer people stared at it, the more their hearts and minds sank together into a state of bewilderment, a suffocating uncertainty that seemed to have no end. In the second half of November, as the data on Atlas grew heavier with each passing day, the scientific debates turned fiercer than ever. At an international online conference, gathering hundreds of astronomers, the tension rose so high that many admitted they had never seen the scientific community so deeply divided. One camp insisted Atlas was nothing more than an unusual interstellar comet, its chemistry and trajectory unpredictable, but still within the boundaries of physics. The opposing camp pushed back hard, presenting evidence of rhythmic fluctuations in its light and orbit. "A natural celestial body does not behave this way," a professor from Canada emphasized. "Either we've overlooked a fundamental law of physics, or Atlas is something entirely different." That statement hit the conference like a stone dropped into deep water. Curiosity is the engine of science, but when curiosity turns into doubt about the very foundation of knowledge, it becomes haunting. Researchers were no longer debating with data alone. They were debating with the strain of their own beliefs. For if Atlas truly defied the known laws, it would mean the entire cosmic picture humanity had built over centuries might be nothing more than an unfinished sketch. The media wasted no time in fanning the flames of this divide into a public spectacle. Major newspapers splashed headlines: Atlas, the object that challenges Newton's laws? And, was Einstein wrong? On television, experts sat under the heat of studio lights, forced to answer questions with no real answers. Audiences watching the news had no idea which side to believe. One day, they were told that Atlas was a stunning natural phenomenon. Next, they heard it could be proof of some unknown form of energy. Confusion spread everywhere, like a fog blanketing the collective mind. Among the public, two sharply different attitudes began to crystallize. One group chose faith. They saw Atlas as a reminder that science still had countless mysteries to uncover, that uncertainty was simply the threshold of discovery. But the other group panicked. They saw uncertainty as an abyss, swallowing up every anchor humanity had ever relied upon. If we can't even explain the orbit of a celestial body, what else can we believe in? Read one viral social media post, shared millions of times. It captured the deepest fear. Uncertainty was no longer just the state of science. It had become the state of society itself. Behind closed doors, governments were equally at a loss. They were forced to monitor every new scientific report, yet they understood little more than the general public. Press releases carried the familiar line, "There is no immediate threat." But behind the scenes, many leaders admitted they had no idea how they would explain anything to their people if Atlas continued to reveal new mysteries. This very uncertainty made official statements sound hollow, pushing the public deeper into the spiral of doubt. Meanwhile, on a personal level, millions wrestled with turbulent emotions. Some couldn't sleep, lying awake, staring at the sky, asking themselves what Atlas really was. Some dreamed of its blue light flooding their rooms, morphing into incomprehensible symbols across the walls. Some sank into despair, feeling as if the world itself was unraveling. Yet others chose to see it romantically. They wrote poetry, composed music, and believed this uncertainty was humanity's chance to learn humility. At both extremes, one truth remained. Atlas was no longer just a challenge to science. It had pushed all of humanity into a psychological state, never before experienced a planet united in questioning, bewildered together, and unsettled in the face of the unknown future. By the end of November 2025, as Atlas continued drifting away from its expected trajectory and plunging deeper into the heart of the solar system, no one could deny that it had become a colossal question mark hanging over humanity. Scientific reports were released in rapid succession, yet instead of clarity, they only thickened the fog. One research institute announced it had detected cyclical fluctuations in its light, resembling an invisible wave. Almost immediately, another group refuted the claim, arguing it was nothing more than a statistical coincidence. A week later, new findings suggested Atlas was emitting radiation at an unusual frequency never before recorded in any other celestial body. But when pressed for explanations, the researchers fell silent, admitting they themselves had no idea what the source of that radiation might be. In such an atmosphere, scientific inquiry became a double-edged sword. It drove the brightest minds to dive headfirst into research, but it also chipped away at humanity's trust in certainty. Each new question was like a door swinging open, yet instead of leading to light, it revealed dark corridors with no maps and no destinations. Scientists began speaking of a new chapter in physics, a phrase that carried both excitement and unease. For opening a new chapter also implied that the old one, the very framework humanity had relied upon for centuries, might have been incomplete, or worse, a flawed picture all along. Meanwhile, the public was swept into an ever-intensifying storm of contradictions. Some gazed at Atlas with eyes burning with faith. They believed it was the key to unlocking a door to knowledge humanity had never accessed before, that through it we would come to understand the true nature of the universe more deeply. But others trembled, feeling as if every familiar foundation was crumbling beneath their feet. They asked one another, if even a celestial body can't be explained, then do we really understand anything about this universe at all? Uncertainty became the universal state, seeping from academia into coffee shops, from scientific forums into family dinner tables. The entire planet seemed to be living inside one vast psychological experiment, where the most important question was no longer, what is Atlas? But, what do we truly know? Governments continued issuing statements, but their tone sounded increasingly hollow. There is no direct danger to Earth. They repeated again and again, yet the words felt like a flimsy umbrella in the middle of a storm. The public was no longer asking about physical threats, but about meaning. Why was Atlas behaving so strangely? Why were the data sets so contradictory? And above all, why was science the lighthouse that had guided humanity for centuries now faltering in confusion? In that vacuum, uncertainty spread like an invisible contagion, leaving everyone feeling as though they were standing at a crossroads with no signposts. At last, as November drew to a close, humanity was forced to accept a strange reality. Atlas remained there, silently continuing its journey, while we were left drowning in a sea of questions. There were no definitive answers, no firm conclusions, only one undeniable truth. Every hypothesis was incomplete, every data point conflicted, and every attempt at explanation only widened the darkness. Atlas had compelled humanity to confront its own limitations, to admit that science, no matter how powerful, could still lose its way before a single enigmatic object. In its mysterious silence, Atlas offered no clear message. Yet it was precisely that silence that became the loudest voice, a reminder that the universe is larger, more complex, and far more mysterious than humanity had ever dared to imagine. And so, as November closed, Atlas was no longer just a celestial body. It had become a question etched into the global psyche. A question without an answer, an unknown suspended in the sky, leaving all of humanity at once, curious, bewildered, and uncertain. And perhaps it was in that very state that humanity finally began to learn how to truly face the immensity of the cosmos. At the beginning of December 2025, as the first cold winds of winter swept across the northern hemisphere, another chill rose quietly within humanity, a chill of doubt, of restless curiosity, and of the silent shiver that comes from facing a mystery no one could touch. 3. I Divided by Atlas continued its uncertain journey through the solar system. It caused no collisions, no disasters, yet it was precisely this silence that kept humanity from sitting still. The steady stream of data arriving from observatories rejected every attempt at explanation, turning Atlas into a hazy mirror that reflected nothing but the limits of human knowledge. At first, people thought a few weeks of study would be enough to classify it, to label it, the way we had done with countless other celestial bodies. But the more we observed, the more we analyzed, the more Atlas resembled a chessboard arranged by some unseen player. Strange fluctuations in its light, chemical ratios that matched no known model, even its rhythmically shifting orbit, all of it combined like a piece of music already composed, but with no sheet of notation for the listeners to follow. And in that void, curiosity flared, but it was quickly shadowed by doubt, and behind that doubt came shivers no one could quite control. At international conferences, the world's leading scientists, instead of offering answers, only stacked more questions atop the pile. Is Atlas merely a natural celestial body, or the result of some process we've never known before? One asked aloud. Rather than reassuring, the question deepened the creases on every face in the room. Another astrophysicist admitted bluntly, "We want to understand it, but do we even have the strength to accept the truth behind it?" The words silenced the hall, as if a cold wind had just swept through. Curiosity urged humanity to open the door, but hesitation froze their hands just inches from the handle. Doubt and curiosity did not remain confined to scientific circles. They seeped into every layer of society. On online forums, millions of theories were put forth. Some believed Atlas was a fragment of an ancient civilization, a message sent across time and space. Others argued it was a cosmic machine, operating on mechanisms humanity could not yet fathom. Still others suggested Atlas might be carrying something, a form of matter, a kind of signal that could alter human consciousness itself. These theories, no matter how far-fetched, were eagerly embraced because they revealed both a desperate hunger to know and a buried fear. What if one of them turned out to be true? In city squares, people continued to gather to watch Atlas, but the atmosphere was no longer the same as those euphoric nights of early November. Gone were the cheers of awe. In their place were thoughtful stares and hushed conversations. No longer did people ask, "How beautiful is it?" but instead, "What is it really?" And in each of those questions trembled unease. Some described Atlas's blue glow as an eye watching Earth. Others said they felt scrutinized, judged. Those comparisons thickened the air, as though beneath its poetic light lay a cold verdict hanging over humankind. On the night of December 5, when Atlas suddenly flared brilliantly and then dimmed again within a matter of minutes, a fresh wave of debate erupted. Was it a signal, or merely an outburst of sublimation on its surface? No one could give a definitive answer. But one thing millions of people agreed upon was this: they had all shuddered. Curiosity pushed them to watch, yet unease kept them from staring too long. Atlas had turned the sky into a mirror, reflecting humanity's own psychology, pulled forward by doubt, driven by curiosity, yet chilled to the bone by the fear that perhaps they were standing before a secret never meant to be known. In the first days of December, while the planet's attention remained fixed on Atlas, the atmosphere inside scientific conferences grew heavier by the day. Doubt was no longer posed as cautious questions. It had hardened into extreme hypotheses, hurled into the middle of debates. A research group in North America announced that Atlas's pale blue light varied in rhythmic pulses, repeating every 131 seconds. "A comet cannot keep time," they declared. That single statement dropped over the hall like a shiver of ice, for if true, it meant Atlas was transmitting some kind of signal, an intentional repetition. Curiosity pushed other teams to verify the claim, and within just a few days, additional data confirmed that the light fluctuations indeed followed a cycle. Yet no one dared to declare it a signal outright, because doing so would mean humanity was facing a possibility beyond imagination. Suspicion spread quickly, ensnaring even the most composed minds. If Atlas is truly sending a message, then the question is no longer what is it, but what does it want, said one European scientist. When the media echoed those words, they cut into the public psyche like a blade of ice. Meanwhile, another research group in South America proposed that Atlas might contain exotic matter, a form of atomic structure never before identified. They based their theory on the strange spectral lines, arguing that those unmatched streaks of light could be the signature of alien chemistry. Their announcement ignited shockwaves, quickly seized upon by headlines that gasped, "Atlas carries matter unknown to Earth." Though the researchers themselves remained cautious, once the idea escaped into public discourse, people could not help but tremble. If Atlas truly carried matter no one had ever seen, was it dangerous? Could approaching it for study unleash something far beyond our control? Curiosity burned like wildfire, but its flames were chased by long shadows of dread. Discussions about Atlas on social media were no longer filled with admiration or wonder. They became fierce battlegrounds. Some insisted that Atlas was undeniable evidence of cosmic intelligence. Others warned that treating it like a message was reckless, that humanity might awaken something best left undisturbed. Each new hypothesis was like a gust of wind, fanning both the blaze of curiosity and the cold draughts of fear. Within the scientific community, a bitter truth grew clear. No one truly knew what to believe. Theories surfaced, were dismantled, and replaced by even bolder speculations. Atlas had become a mirror reflecting humanity's own unease. The harder we tried to know, the more we shuddered at the prospect of actually finding out. Doubt no longer pointed outward, it turned inward. People began doubting knowledge itself, doubting human capacity to explain, doubting even the science once seen as unshakable. On December 10, an independent group published findings that Atlas's slight orbital deviations coincided with its light cycle. The announcement sent the public into near chaos. If its orbit and light were linked, then Atlas was not merely a physical body, it was behaving as though it had intent. The claim, still hotly contested, was enough to send a wave of shivers across the globe. In public squares, in private conversations, the subject was no longer Atlas's beauty. It was apprehension. What would it mean if Atlas actually knew we were watching it? By mid-December, doubt and curiosity about Atlas had spilled far beyond the walls of laboratories, sweeping across the world like a storm. It wasn't just scientists anymore. Politicians, artists, philosophers, even ordinary citizens were caught in the whirlpool. Atlas dominated front-page headlines, became the centerpiece of primetime television, and was the most searched term on the internet. Yet instead of offering reassurance or unity, it triggered an unprecedented crisis of trust. Humanity suddenly realized it no longer knew what to believe in. During a live broadcast in New York, one scientist asserted that Atlas might indeed be sending out an organized signal. Just hours later, another expert appeared on a rival channel to completely dismiss the claim, calling it statistical hallucination. Viewers sitting in front of their televisions found themselves no closer to clarity, only dragged deeper into suspicion. If the brightest minds can't agree, how can we possibly understand? The question echoed everywhere, from small coffee shops to major academic forums. Theories continued to multiply wildly, far beyond control. A group of philosophers suggested Atlas was a cosmic test, forcing humanity to confront the arrogance of its own intellect. Certain religious groups declared Atlas to be a divine sign, a doorway to a new era. On social media, millions spread the idea that Atlas was the cosmic eye staring back at Earth. Memes, speculative videos, and songs inspired by Atlas flooded every platform. But instead of being simply playful, most carried an eerie undertone: glowing blue eyes, encrypted messages, endless doors. Curiosity pushed people to share, but unease crept in whenever they considered the possibility that they weren't just observing a celestial body, that they were being observed in return. In many places, that unease hardened into action. Some small communities stopped skywatching altogether, treating Atlas as a bad omen. A few even built structures to block parts of the sky, as if shielding themselves from its piercing gaze. On the other extreme, radical groups organized connection rituals, convinced that the flickering blue light was an invitation they had to answer. What began as scientific uncertainty had now mutated into hundreds of interpretations, ranging from superstition to extreme science. And it was this fragmentation that pushed the world into a psychological chaos. People longed to understand, yet trembled at the thought of truly knowing. Politics couldn't stay on the sidelines. Parliaments in several countries held emergency hearings, demanding explanations from scientists, but the response remained the same: we don't have enough data. That repeated phrase only deepened the public's unease. Rumors swirled that some governments were hiding critical information, that Atlas carried dangers too great to announce. Though evidence was lacking, the rumors spread like wildfire because they touched a collective nerve. When knowledge falters, suspicion becomes a crutch, but that crutch only made the ground shake harder, producing more phantoms than light. Amid all this turmoil, Atlas remained silent. It continued gliding through space, radiating its steady blue rhythm, cold, mesmerizing, unbroken. And it was that silence that chilled humanity most. If Atlas were chaotic, people could chalk it up to nature. If it were destructive, they could label it a threat, but its unwavering calm, paired with its pulsing glow, made it seem almost sentient, watching Earth without speaking a word. A silence so heavy, it drove human intellect to decode relentlessly, while at the same time whispering fear. Perhaps there are questions humanity was never meant to ask. Perhaps Atlas itself was the warning. By late December 2025, as the old year drew to a close, humanity remained bound in the fever called Atlas. The holidays normally tied to family gatherings and peace were now shrouded in a strange psychological veil, burning curiosity fused with icy doubt. Every eye turned toward the blue celestial wanderer, no longer just to admire its beauty, but to wait, to tremble, and to question. Atlas had become a silent character, a living enigma the entire planet could not stop watching. Within the scientific community, pressure reached its breaking point. Laboratories ran day and night, yet instead of answers, they uncovered only more layers of anomalies. One team announced that Atlas's light might contain binary code, patterns of brightness and darkness strung together like electronic signals. Another team quickly dismissed the claim as a coincidence, but whether true or false, the very suggestion that Atlas might be communicating sent a shiver through the collective spine. Curiosity made us want to listen closely to every note of its light, while fear whispered, if it really is speaking, how would we ever respond? In society at large, reactions grew increasingly extreme. Some proclaimed Atlas a messenger of truth, and formed communities of worship, believing it carried a sacred message. Others condemned it as a cosmic omen, a sign of impending disaster. These clashing worldviews stretched the global atmosphere taut, like a string pulled to the point of breaking. People longed to know more, yet also wished to turn away. But no one truly could. Atlas hung in the sky like an unblinking eye, forcing everyone to confront their own unease. Inside families, conversations about Atlas replaced traditional New Year's wishes. Children asked their parents, "Is it watching us?" Adults whispered, If it carries a message, will we have the courage to hear it? In public squares, crowds gathered to count down to 2026, but their gazes were drawn upward to the blue streak of Atlas etched across the heavens like a permanent scar. Cheers for the new year mingled with sighs, murmurs of doubt, and moments of eerie silence. When the midnight bells rang, humanity stepped into a new year in a state unlike anything before, a planet collectively haunted by a mystery. Atlas did not provide answers, yet its silence spoke the loudest. It stirred a curiosity so intense that people wanted to tear down every boundary to understand, but also planted a vague fear that some truths were never meant to be known. By the close of December, humanity had to face a sobering reality. Atlas was not merely an object passing through the solar system. It was a cold mirror, reflecting the deepest chambers of the human heart, the yearning to know the truth, and the dread that the truth itself might consume us. January 2026 opened unlike any moment humanity had ever known. Instead of being filled with laughter and fireworks, the world was consumed by relentless headlines about 3I divided by Atlas. Just days after New Year's, a flood of new data from observatories across the globe was released, and it left both scientists and the public stunned beyond measure. The light emitted by Atlas, long considered strange, suddenly shifted into a more deliberate structure. No longer vague, random pulses like the breathing of a celestial body, but sequences of light and dark arranged in exact patterns. On charts, the glowing lines appeared like rows of coded characters, repeating with unnerving precision. Scientists were instantly pulled into a state of both awe and bewilderment. Some exclaimed that this might be a kind of cosmic binary code. Others fiercely rejected the idea, insisting it was nothing more than a statistical illusion. But the more teams checked, the clearer it became. The sequence repeated every 131 seconds, without a single deviation. To dismiss it as chance would mean embracing an impossibility. Gasps of astonishment filled conference halls. Confusion weighed heavily on even the sharpest minds. Because if Atlas truly was emitting an ordered pattern of light, then the most terrifying possibility emerged. Perhaps it was not a natural object at all. At an emergency meeting in Geneva, an astrophysicist whispered, "It's as if a system is trying to say something." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of unease across the room. Even the most cautious experts could no longer maintain composure. The question pressed on every mind: if this was a signal, then who did it mean for? And more urgently, who created it? The public response was just as explosive. Major newspapers ran front-page headlines in red ink. Atlas sending code? Is this artificial technology? On social media, millions shared theories, from aliens transmitting a message to Atlas is an interstellar machine. Concepts once confined to science fiction novels now flood everyday conversation. People no longer looked at the sky with admiration, but with breathless astonishment that bordered on dread. In living rooms, children asked their parents, "Is someone knocking on Earth's door?" Adults fell silent, unable to answer, offering reassurances with trembling voices. Some described the sight of Atlas's blinking blue light as like being watched by a colossal eye across the void. Curiosity kept them staring, but fear made them shiver, as though at any moment that eye could blink, opening onto a new era that might not be kind to humanity. Research teams scrambled to decode the sequence, comparing it to Morse code, binary, and even modern computer languages. Parts of it seemed to carry logic, other stretches collapsed into chaos. "It's like listening to radio static without the right frequency," one scientist remarked. But what left everyone breathless was the flawless repetition. Every 131 seconds, the same chain of light and darkness reappeared, as if the cosmos itself were ticking like a clock. And the question echoed louder than ever: what or who set this clock in motion? By January 2026, humanity entered an emotional state unlike any in its history. Stunned to the point of trembling, confused as every theory crumbled, and afraid of the shadow of artificial design looming behind the veil of the stars, Atlas, once just a mysterious visitor, now stood revealed as something more: a structure that might think, a cold mirror reflecting the question humanity had long been too afraid to face. Are we truly alone in the universe, or have we stumbled upon the legacy of another intelligence? As soon as the repeating 131-second light sequences were announced, research centers across the globe launched into a frantic race to decode them. Supercomputers were mobilized, signal processing algorithms fine-tuned, and billions of lines of data sifted through every hour. People hoped that with enough patience, a hidden pattern would emerge, something that could explain everything. But the deeper they dug, the greater the astonishment, and the thicker the confusion. For the sequences of light did not simplify over time. They grew more and more like a language one humanity had never encountered before. Hypotheses poured out in quick succession. A research group in Germany declared they had identified binary structures in the sequences, reminiscent of primitive computer signals. Just hours later, a Japanese team announced that the pattern was not binary at all, but resembled a tri-symbolic code, a form of logic beyond the reach of our current machines. The fierce contradiction turned online conferences into battlegrounds of debate. Yet through every clash, one feeling remained clear. No one had expected a seemingly inert celestial body to produce data so staggeringly complex. In the media, the confusion spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed across front pages, "Atlas A, message from an alien intelligence." Television programs invited not only scientists but also philosophers and even science fiction novelists to weigh in. The more voices joined, the deeper the public fell into a state of awe tinged with unease. One viewer described it bluntly: "It's like standing before a blackboard filled with formulas. Maybe the answers are right there, but we can't read them, and that makes me shiver." Inside laboratories, many admitted they were haunted by the data to the point of sleeplessness. A researcher in Chile confessed that whenever he closed his eyes, he still saw the flashing sequences in his mind, as though Atlas were knocking at the door of his consciousness with an unknown tongue. "We want to know what it's saying," he said, "but sometimes I'm afraid. If it truly is a message, do we even have the courage to hear all of it?" The admission spread rapidly, becoming a symbol of how millions felt. Curiosity pulling them closer, fear pushing them back, both forces locking humanity in a cold, trembling grip. By mid-January, a new shock sent waves around the globe. An independent analysis team in California announced they had found repeating patterns in the light sequences that mirrored the structure of DNA. Though no one dared to make definitive claims, the mere suggestion that Atlas might be transmitting signals that imitated the blueprint of life was enough to leave the world breathless. If it was a coincidence, it was terrifying. If it was intentional, then the dreadful question surfaced immediately: who or what designed such a pattern? Astonishment had become a constant state. Confusion had swelled into a storm of the mind, and the fear of artificial origin loomed larger each day. On public forums, new questions began to echo with alarming clarity. If Atlas is artificial, is it just passing through, or is it carrying out a mission? Another question struck even deeper. If it's a machine, then where are its makers? No one had answers, but each question rang out like the pounding of drums, warning of something beyond human control. January still stretched ahead, but humanity had already crossed a threshold. They no longer gazed at Atlas with the wide-eyed wonder of before. Now, with every flicker of its blue light, the entire planet was seized by the same collective shudder, stunned, confused, and afraid they were witnessing not nature, but a different kind of intelligence, cold, distant, and artificial, leaving its indelible mark against the canvas of the sky. By the end of January 2026, the debate over Atlas had erupted beyond the confines of science, spilling directly into politics, culture, and religion. Globally broadcast conferences gathered hundreds of experts from every field, where arguments raged with unprecedented intensity. One faction insisted Atlas was simply a rare natural phenomenon, extraordinary, yes, but still within the realm of physics. To frame it as artificial, they warned, was a dangerous illusion. The opposing sides struck back fiercely, brandishing evidence: the repeating light sequences, the DNA-like patterns, the bizarre orbital shifts. "A random celestial body does not behave this way," a Canadian astronomer declared. "It follows a script, and that script is bewildering us to the core." The media wasted no time turning those disputes into headlines. News channels splashed banners across screens. Atlas? Natural or artificial? Is humanity facing alien technology? Talk shows invited not only scientists but also philosophers, even psychologists, to weigh in. Yet instead of clarity, every new statement only deepened the public's astonishment, and confusion spread wider. Some commentators compared the moment to the first glimpse of the atomic bomb, not because an explosion had occurred, but because the sheer awareness of a power beyond human understanding now hovered above the Earth. In society at large, reactions veered toward extremes. Many groups embraced Atlas as proof of extraterrestrial intelligence, imagining it as an interstellar probe sent to observe humanity. Online communities sprang up, spreading images of Atlas as both deity and machine, a symbolic herald of a new era. Others called for vigilance, warning that any artificial construct implied a maker, and the chilling question followed: where was that maker, and what was its purpose? Fear of artificial origin quickly outgrew private unease, metastasizing into a collective obsession. Governments were more paralyzed than ever. In closed-door meetings, heads of state repeated the same question: if Atlas is artificial, what do we do? But no one had an answer. There was no plan, no precedent, no roadmap. Official statements clung to the same tired refrain: we have detected no direct threat. But the public knew better. Those words were stalling tactics. The silence of world leaders, their inability to provide clarity, only deepened suspicion and confusion. Meanwhile, academia splintered further. A small group of researchers proposed that Atlas might be a form of interstellar probe, akin to the Voyagers humanity had once launched, but powered by technology millions of years more advanced. The idea alone ignited waves of dread. If Atlas were a probe, then it had a sender. And if there was a sender, what kind of civilization were they? How powerful? Were they watching Earth? Or had Atlas merely been left behind as a trace? Merely asking such questions was enough to make millions shudder. The public, already swept into the storm of information, was left utterly adrift. Some admitted they no longer dared to look at Atlas, describing it as a synthetic eye staring down from space. Others grew obsessed, spending sleepless nights tracking its rhythmic flashes, convinced they might discover the key. Curiosity and confusion pulled them closer, but the fear of artificial intent sent chills through them every time the blue light flickered. The entire planet now felt as though it had been thrust into a colossal decoding game, with no assurance that the prize would be knowledge or a nightmare. By the close of January, no resolution had emerged. Atlas drifted silently on, pulsing with its steady sequence of light. But within humanity, astonishment had hardened into a permanent state. Confusion had become the rhythm of daily life, and the fear of artificial origin loomed over every dream. Humanity had once believed itself the sole keeper of intelligence. Now, it faced the terrifying possibility that its own intellect was nothing more than a fragile candle, flickering in the wind of a machine from elsewhere. In early February 2026, as Atlas continued its path across Mars's orbit, Earth remained shackled in a state of astonishment and bewilderment. The 131-second light sequence was no longer a mystery reserved for researchers alone. It had become the haunting pulse of all humanity. Every time observatories broadcast the sequence live, millions tuned in, holding their breath as they counted each flicker. Silence spread through living rooms, public squares, and even churches, as if everyone were listening to a symphony played by an invisible hand. Yet within that collective hush, two opposite emotions coexisted: awe that choked the throat at the possibilities unfolding, and a bone-deep fear that Atlas might be the creation of an intelligence not of this Earth. International organizations convened emergency meetings one after another, but no consensus emerged. One camp argued it was an artificial signal, deliberate, structured, purposeful. Another warned that such hasty assumptions could plunge the world into chaos. But the very caution in those warnings only deepened public suspicion that something was being concealed. Across social media, questions spread like wildfire. If Atlas is artificial, who created it? If it's a machine, what is it doing in our solar system? Each question cracked another fault line in the collective psyche, where curiosity and fear tangled into a knot impossible to unravel. In major cities, a shiver seemed to hover over public gatherings. People no longer gazed at Atlas as a radiant comet, but as a sentient presence, one that watched, one that sent out its own heartbeat. Whispers circulated. It could be recording everything we do. It could be waiting for a reply. Curiosity urged people to decode every pulse, but dread whispered that the very moment of decoding might also be the instant a door was opened, one that could never be closed again. Within academia, a terrifying concept began to emerge: the idea of orphaned technology. Some scientists suggested Atlas might be the product of a civilization long extinct, a machine abandoned, still carrying out a program written millions of years ago? If so, Atlas was not just artificial. It was a remnant of a catastrophe humanity had never known. That vision chilled many to the core. Perhaps what they were witnessing was not a greeting but the echo of a civilization that no longer existed. The press and the public became instantly obsessed with the idea. Headlines screamed across front pages: Atlas, the orphan machine of the universe? The legacy of a vanished intelligence? These speculations cast a heavy shadow over the collective imagination. If Atlas truly was artificial, it proved that intelligence could soar to staggering heights yet also vanish, leaving only cold relics adrift in space. Humanity stood both astonished at such a vision and confused over whether to celebrate or to fear. In the end, what remained was only an anxious silence. By the dawn of February, the world had changed. No one looked at the night sky the same way anymore. Each flicker of Atlas was like a knock on the door of the mind. Were humans still masters of their own destiny, or had they unwittingly stepped into a play written by another hand? Atlas did not answer. It simply continued to pulse its steady light, cold and beautiful, leaving humanity suspended in endless astonishment and confusion, while feeding a growing dread that the artificial was no longer a distant hypothesis, but a reality burning bright above their heads. February 2026 dawned in a state humanity had never known before, a sweeping sense of relief, drifting through the air like a spring breeze, yet layered with an undercurrent of unease that refused to fade. After months of tension, suspicion, astonishment, and confusion, orbital data finally confirmed that 3I divided by Atlas was moving farther away, leaving Earth's direct sphere of influence. It had not changed course, shown no sudden acceleration, and displayed no sign of posing an immediate threat. Reports that had once silenced cities with anxiety were now delivered in a calmer atmosphere. The scientific community, so fiercely divided for weeks, could at last agree on one thing. Humanity was not facing an instant catastrophe. Everywhere, that sense of relief was expressed in different ways. In Europe, public squares once packed with anxious crowds awaiting Atlas updates became gathering places for stargazing, this time with smiles of ease. In Asia, small ceremonies were held to bid farewell to the blue visitor. People released sky lanterns, treating them as peaceful messages sent off on its long journey. In the Americas, schools organized outdoor activities where children drew pictures of Atlas not with shaky lines anymore, but in bright colors, blue, white, yellow, turning it into a memory of beauty rather than a looming threat. All of it spoke to one truth. After holding its breath for so many months, humankind could finally exhale. At dinner tables, conversations slowly returned to everyday topics. Yet woven between bursts of laughter came the quiet, lingering questions. "It really won't come back, will it?" a child asked their parents. Adults smiled reassuringly, but in their eyes flickered a shadow of doubt. Relief was real, but not absolute. It felt like a radiant sunrise with grey clouds drifting across the horizon. The 131-second light sequence had not disappeared. Atlas, though receding into the distance, continued to send its steady, cold pulse of light, and that alone kept unease clinging to the edges of humanity's collective mind. On television, one scientist spoke bluntly: "We are safe." But safe does not mean we understand. His words froze the auditorium in silence and were repeated thousands of times across social media. They captured perfectly the paradox of the moment. On one hand, people were relieved to be free of immediate danger. On the other, they could not deny that the truth of Atlas remained a shadow no one had pierced. And within that shadow, unease still prowled quietly like a ghost beneath the banquet table. Perhaps it was this very contradiction that defined the spirit of February. Humanity laughed more, spoke more, yet when night fell, their eyes inevitably turned skyward, searching again for that blue light. Relief allowed them to live fully in the present, but the undercurrent of unease kept them vigilant toward the future. Atlas, once a terrifying spectre, had become a symbol with two faces, a reassurance that Earth was safe, and at the same time, a reminder that the universe still held mysteries it had no intention of revealing. As March approached, relief settled into the world like a new rhythm. People began to speak of Atlas more as a memory than a threat. News broadcasts that once opened with urgent updates on its orbit and brightness now relegated it to a small item in the science section. In classrooms, teachers spoke of Atlas almost like a story. It was a cosmic guest that passed by, made our hearts race, and then moved on. The words had changed, the tone had softened. No more furrowed brows of worry, no more suffocating press conferences. Instead, the entire planet was exhaling together, savoring the rare lightness after months of carrying a heavy burden. And yet, beneath this collective relief, unease lingered quietly. In scientific conferences, the shouting matches were gone, but heavier, slower questions began to surface. If Atlas posed no threat to Earth, then what was its purpose? What does the 131-second light sequence mean, if not a coincidence? Some philosophers argued that the greatest danger was not collision or destruction, but the possibility that humanity would be forced to live indefinitely with a question that had no answer, and that, in silence, had become its own kind of pressure. In religious and philosophical circles, Atlas still loomed like a shadow. Some saw its departure as proof that the universe did not wish harm, that humanity had been gifted a second chance to reflect upon itself. Others feared, if it left, does that mean it will return? That single line, shared endlessly across social networks, sent chills down spines. The unease no longer screamed, but whispered like an underground current, enough to sting the heart amid laughter. Many cities began weaving Atlas into cultural life. Museums opened exhibitions called The Blue Memory, displaying images and data collected during its passage. Visitors smiled at the ethereal photographs of its glow, only to fall silent when they reached the sections labeled Unresolved Data. In those rooms, relief and unease coexisted side by side, joy that disaster had been averted, and quiet disquiet at the unanswered mysteries left behind. Inside families, conversations still circled Atlas. Parents reassured children that everything was safe, yet stayed up late, scrolling through news, searching for any hint of discoveries. Relief brought smiles in daylight, but unease crept into their dreams at night. Some confessed to dreaming of Atlas disappearing beyond the horizon, yet the 131-second rhythm continued to pulse in their minds, like a soft, persistent knock on the door of consciousness. As spring drew near, humanity began learning to live with this paradox. Relieved that catastrophe had not struck, yet carrying an invisible scar in their awareness. Atlas had gone, but it had left behind a riddle with no solution, a shadow with no clear outline. And even as people laughed under the bright March sun, they knew that somewhere in the cosmos, that blue rhythm still echoed, reminding them that the universe's deepest questions had never truly left us. By March 2026, as Atlas drifted farther beyond favorable observation range, humanity entered a strange season of remembrance, half relief, half lingering unease. The name 3I divided by Atlas no longer carried the weight of an apocalypse, but instead surfaced in exhibitions, concerts, and stories retold as part of a shared collective memory. In New York, a museum opened an exhibition titled Blue Echoes, displaying hundreds of photographs of the 131-second light sequence. Visitors marveled at the ethereal beauty, but stood silent before the final plaque, meaning still unresolved. In that very moment of exhale, unease seeped back in, reminding everyone that this piece was only temporary. Artists across the globe embraced Atlas as a new wellspring of inspiration. In Berlin, a composer premiered a symphony called 131 Seconds, beginning with pounding rhythms, swelling into a passage of gentle relief, and closing with an open-ended silence. In Tokyo, choreographers staged a performance mimicking Atlas's motion, steady orbits punctuated by abrupt pauses that sent shivers through the audience. In Buenos Aires, a novelist released a speculative tale portraying Atlas as the relic of a long-dead civilization, a machine adrift in space that happened to brush against Earth. These works spread quickly, transforming public fear into art, yet paradoxically stirring fresh anxiety. The art soothed by aesthetic beauty, but whispered a haunting question. If it was artificial, who sent it? Philosophers and scholars joined in with fervor. International forums debated Atlas's meaning more intensely than ever before. Some argued it was a collective mirror, forcing humanity to confront the boundaries of its own knowledge. Others insisted its safe departure was more unsettling than an actual impact. If it merely passed by, perhaps its true purpose was never destruction, but observation. These arguments planted a subtler seed of anxiety in the public mind, the fear not of catastrophe averted, but of meaning left ungrasped, and it was that emptiness, more than danger itself, that made relief feel so fragile. In everyday life, Atlas slowly entered family lore. Grandparents told their grandchildren, "We once saw a light unlike any other, repeating like the heartbeat of the universe." School children painted Atlas in shades of deep blue, nicknaming it the guest star. Adults, when recalling nights of observation, smiled faintly, yet their voices carried a low undercurrent. Those memories were not entirely serene. They were like a collective scar, no longer sharp with pain, but still tingling when touched. On television, anchors referred to Atlas as the guest that has gone, as though humanity had bid farewell to a familiar visitor. Yet immediately after, a small caption always appeared: "The 131-second signal continues." That single line was enough to send a chill through viewers. It reminded them that even as Atlas faded into the distance, its blue pulse still echoed somewhere in the cosmos, like a relentless clock. Relief allowed people to return to daily rhythms, but hidden unease ensured they would never forget. Some questions are not easily erased, and sometimes the questions themselves are the most terrifying truth of all. By late March 2026, Atlas had traveled so far that medium-sized telescopes could no longer see it clearly. For most of the public, this marked a closure. Humanity exhaled, as if bidding farewell to a mysterious guest who had finally stepped away from its doorstep. Television broadcasts, once devoting half an hour each night to Atlas, now spare only a few seconds. The interstellar visitor continues to drift beyond the solar system. Behind those calm words, the world let out a collective sigh, a release that echoed through cities, villages, and even cramped apartments. A weight that had pressed down on the entire planet suddenly lifted, leaving behind a rare pocket of serenity. In many places, people organized farewell ceremonies for Atlas. In Chile, astronomers gathered high in the Andes, raising glasses of wine to celebrate that the guest has departed without bringing harm. In Paris, a group of artists staged a nighttime light performance, recreating the 131-second flicker as a tribute. In Kenya, Maasai communities danced under the moon, treating Atlas as a spirit that had visited and left in peace. Across the world, despite differences in language and culture, a single emotion united them all: relief, as though they had just awakened from a long nightmare. Yet beneath the laughter and congratulatory words, the undercurrent of unease did not vanish. The 131-second pulse, though fading in the data, still lingered. Scientists reminded the public, Atlas moving away does not mean the question has been answered. A philosopher wrote in a journal, "We sigh with relief because we were not destroyed, but who can be certain that Atlas's silence is truly a blessing?" Those words fell like a shadow over the farewell celebrations, dimming smiles with a brief chill of doubt. In humanity's collective memory, Atlas began to take shape as a story to be told, though never fully explained. It stood both as a reminder of human fragility and a symbol of resilience against fear. Children would remember the evenings when families gathered to watch its blue light. Adults would recall the tense weeks when the entire planet held its breath. And together, all would remember that in 2025, 2026, humankind had shared a singular experience: relief at having escaped disaster, entwined with anxiety that the universe still held secrets beyond our maturity to comprehend. At last, when Atlas disappeared entirely into the haze of data, the world resumed its daily rhythm. But deep down, no one truly believed the story was finished. Perhaps this contradiction itself was Atlas's greatest legacy, a salvation-like relief paired with an undercurrent of unease flowing quietly beneath. Humanity smiled as it looked ahead, yet still glanced up at the sky from time to time, asking, "Will another visitor one day come knocking?" And in that fleeting moment, relief and unease merged again, becoming the shared heartbeat of a planet still so small before the infinite cosmos. April 2026 arrived with 3i divided by Atlas, now so distant that it appeared only faintly through the world's largest telescopes. The name that had once shaken humanity with astonishment, confusion, and dread was now spoken with warmth, like a chapter of a book that had finally closed. Yet instead of fear alone, people began to realize they had gained something from the interstellar visitor. After months of tension, they no longer trembled but rose with a new conviction. Humanity could face even greater challenges together, and hope was not a luxury but a vital force for survival. Universities quickly became the centers where this new conviction spread. Students spoke about Atlas with bright eyes no longer trembling, but brimming with curiosity and ambition. They dreamed of new fields of study, of the possibility of ushering in an interstellar astronomy era, where humankind would no longer be confined by its own Sunday. Professors who had once lost sleep over the data now lectured with pride. We witnessed a phenomenon beyond imagination, and we are still here to tell the story. The lecture halls fell into awed silence before erupting in applause, as though confirming that science had just written a new chapter for the future. In politics, Atlas was no longer invoked as a shadow, but as a thread of connection. Leaders who had often criticized one another now used Atlas as proof of the necessity of cooperation. A European head of state declared, "If we can all lift our eyes to the sky together, then we can also join hands to build a better world." Those words spread instantly across the globe, translated into dozens of languages, printed on newspaper covers, pasted onto posters in the streets. People read them, nodded, and smiled, feeling a rare sense of collective pride that despite all their differences, humanity had shared a single, unifying moment. The public, too, found in Atlas a source of comfort and trust. Families told their children, "We were afraid, but we endured." Children drew pictures of Atlas not in dark, ominous colors, but in bright shades of blue and yellow, calling it the Star of Hope. Adults began to speak of Atlas with tender names: the silent teacher, the cosmic mirror. Many said Atlas felt like a harsh test humanity had passed, not by being all-knowing, but by refusing to give up. From anxiety, a quiet collective pride had begun to grow, that humanity had stood firm, had held its breath together, and had proven its strength even when surrounded by the darkness of the cosmos. In popular culture, this current of hope and pride burst into a movement. Films inspired by Atlas no longer ended with apocalyptic scenes, but with humanity holding hands and looking toward the future. Songs rose with powerful lyrics: "We are not alone in the universe, and we are not weak." New literary works did not dwell on fear but emphasized growth, that humanity, though small, had learned to lift its head high before infinity. And within the rhythm of daily life, a new faith began to take root that Atlas was not a warning, but a gentle reminder. The universe is vast, but the hope within the human heart is vaster still. As spring 2026 reached its height, the faith and hope Atlas had left behind no longer lingered merely in conversations, but began to take shape in concrete actions. Governments, which had once gathered only to argue and worry, now found in Atlas a legitimate reason to cooperate more deeply. At the United Nations, a resolution passed with near unanimous support: the creation of the Global Forum for Cosmic Communication. This was not just an institution for astronomical observation, but an unprecedented collaborative effort to prepare humanity for the possibility of facing other cosmic visitors in the future. Delegates stood and applauded not because Atlas had been decoded, but because humanity had learned how not to fear when looking toward the future together. The event ignited a wave of pride. Newspapers wrote, "Atlas has gone, but its legacy is unity." Citizens commented on social media that, for the first time in decades, they felt nations were not merely competing for power, but joining hands for something greater than self-interest. That sense of solidarity became a new source of energy, convincing the public that humanity was maturing after the trial. It was no longer just sighs of relief, but confident nods. We can continue writing our story with a steadier spirit. In the scientific community, a wave of projects was launched. A multinational initiative called the Observatory of Hope was announced, pooling telescopes and supercomputers from 5 continents to monitor interstellar objects. For the first time, data was no longer divided by national borders. It was shared in real time with the entire global scientific community. Young researchers called it the neural network of humanity, where knowledge was connected like a collective mind. Atlas, though far away, had become the catalyst that taught people how to link their intelligence together. In culture, the spirit of trust and hope exploded into a movement. Across many countries, science festivals were organized under the theme, "Looking Up Together." People didn't just display images of Atlas, they performed music, dance, and theater, inspired by its journey. Artists no longer emphasized fear, but painted visions of the future, an Earth that learns from the mysterious touches of the cosmos. On stage, young performers cried out, "We faced infinity, and we are still here." The audience rose to their feet, tears streaming down their faces not from fear, but from pride. Even in everyday life, the change was palpable. Many shared that after Atlas, they worried less about petty clashes at work or in life. If humanity can face a distant celestial body together, then what are my small conflicts worth? One man wrote in his online journal. His words spread, touching millions of hearts. Hope, once thought fragile, was now felt as a tangible strength, spanning politics, science, art, and personal life. Atlas had moved far away, but in that moment, humanity realized it had left more than just questions. It had given back an invisible gift: trust in one's own ability, hope for tomorrow, and pride in knowing that, though small, humankind still knows how to stand tall together before the immensity of the cosmos. By the summer of 2026, when Atlas had receded so far it could only be seen through the world's largest telescopes, its echoes had not faded. On the contrary, Atlas began to enter a new phase, becoming a global spiritual symbol. Religious, artistic, and educational institutions alike seized upon its memory to nurture faith, hope, and a renewed human pride. In Rome, prayers in the great cathedrals no longer overflowed with the anxiety of the previous month. Instead, priests called Atlas a gift from the cosmos, reminding us that even darkness can bring light. Thousands attended, many breaking down in tears, not tears of fear, but of release, mingling relief with the belief that humanity had stepped into a new era. In Mecca, during the holy month of Ramadan, thousands of worshippers looked up at the night sky, recalling the blue pulses that once made the whole planet tremble. Now, they regarded them as proof of the vastness of creation, as if to say, life on Earth is not alone. Across Asia, spiritual teachers described Atlas as a collective mirror, forcing humanity to confront its own fears and learn how to let them go. They urged followers to treat the event as an opportunity to cultivate trust and nurture hope in the power of unity. In the arts, Atlas erupted as an inexhaustible source of inspiration. In Berlin, the symphony, the 131-second pulse, was performed, opening with urgent, tense rhythms that gradually swelled into radiant melodies, as if the whole world exhaled together in relief. The audience rose to their feet, applauding endlessly, many weeping with pride at having been witnesses to history. On Broadway, the musical Atlas, The Visitor, dramatized the journey of the interstellar traveler, ending with thousands of characters joining hands and singing about the future. In Rio de Janeiro, the 2026 Carnival featured a massive parade reenacting Atlas. Hundreds of dancers dressed in shimmering blue and silver, spinning like endless orbits. The crowds roared, not out of lingering fear, but with pride that they had lived through a moment of shared human story. Personal lives, too, were transformed. A woman in Mexico wrote in her diary, "Atlas showed me that life is only one fragment of the grander picture, and the most precious thing is that we endured it together." In Canada, a group of young people created an online community called 131 Seconds of Light, a space to share hopes, plans, and personal stories of finding trust again after crisis. Small communities like these blossomed worldwide, connecting thousands of people who had never met but shared one experience and one pride: that we had stood firm in the face of darkness. In education, Atlas was added to textbooks not merely as an interstellar object but as a spiritual milestone. Teachers told their students, "Atlas has moved on, but its legacy is courage and hope." Children listened closely, drawing pictures of Atlas in bright colors, naming it the Star of Hope. The small classrooms rang with laughter, but also planted seeds of a new belief: that one day, when humanity faces another trial, we will stand together again. The summer of 2026 closed in an atmosphere unlike any before. Relief had transformed into trust, anxiety had transmuted into hope, and from deep within, a collective pride had been ignited. Atlas, once a distant block of ice and stone, was no longer the emblem of fear. It had become proof that humankind, fragile as we are, can still hold its head high beneath the endless sky. By the autumn of 2026, Atlas had traveled so far that ordinary observatories could no longer detect it. For many, its disappearance from the sky marked the closing of a chapter. Yet instead of regret, the world voiced something else: a shared belief that what had been endured would now serve as the foundation for the future, and a hope that Atlas was merely the opening line in a longer dialogue between humanity and the cosmos. The earlier sense of relief had dissolved, giving way to calm assurance, as if the entire planet had just passed through a trial by fire and discovered its own strength. International organizations seized upon that spirit to launch bold new initiatives. a global conference was convened in Geneva, aptly named the Interstellar Future. Hundreds of delegations spanning science, politics, and culture stood together and pledged that Atlas would not be forgotten. One world leader declared, "We cannot allow this event to be just a footnote in textbooks. It must be the beginning of an unprecedented era of cooperation." The hall thundered with applause, echoing like a single heartbeat, resonating with the pride of an entire species. In popular culture, Atlas was immortalized as a symbol of collective strength. International documentaries premiered, tracing the journey from fear to hope, from confusion to pride. Viewers wept as they watched, then walked out of theaters with the feeling that they had been part of something larger than their own lives. Young artists began using Atlas as an emblem of renewed belief. Sculptures, murals, and songs all revolved around the message that humanity can find light even in its darkest moments. In many cities, images of Atlas were projected onto skyscrapers, shimmering like a shared halo above the planet. Individual lives also bore the mark of transformation. Late-night family conversations no longer circled worry, but leaned toward hope. One day, you will live in a world where the stars are no longer strangers. Children wrote essays about Atlas with a tone of confidence, insisting that humanity had matured through the trial. Adults carried a quiet pride in the memory. They had lived through the weeks when the whole world held its breath, and they had witnessed it rise again on the strength of faith. As autumn deepened, journalists everywhere wrote the same refrain: "Atlas has departed, but it has left behind a permanent legacy." That legacy was not the undeciphered data, but the spirit it had awakened. It was the belief that humanity, small as it may be, can rise taller when united. It was the hope that the future, though uncertain, would no longer be colored by fear but illuminated by the hunger to explore and to connect. And above all, it was the pride that in one historic moment, humanity learned to look up at the sky, not with trembling eyes, but with a heart full of courage. As Atlas vanished completely from view, the planet no longer regarded it with dread, but with a quiet vow. As though, within the silence of the cosmos, an invisible pact had been made, that humanity would continue to nurture belief, protect hope, and cherish this collective pride in preparation for any future visitor from the infinite. And in that moment, as the world lifted its gaze to the autumn sky, Atlas was no longer a foreign object. Drifting past, it had become part of our story, a story of trust, of hope, and of the unyielding pride of humankind. As 2026 came to a close, and humanity stepped into the first days of 2027, a new atmosphere settled across the planet. After the storms of emotion from the year before, astonishment, fear, relief, and pride, now came a quieter state. Atlas no longer dominated sensational headlines, no longer loomed like a nightmare above humanity's head. It had drifted too far to be seen, leaving behind a different gift: rational calm. Instead of a frantic debate fueled by panic, people began to approach Atlas as a purely scientific subject. They no longer asked, "Will it destroy us?" but rather, "What can we learn from it?" Inside research institutes, the mood was transformed. Scientists no longer worked in a frenzy of sleepless urgency, but with careful patience, deliberate and steady. The data from the 131-second light pulses were now fed into supercomputers, not in the desperate hunt for immediate safety, but in the pursuit of unraveling a cosmic riddle. Millions of algorithms ran side by side, discarding flimsy hypotheses, reinforcing those with real weight. Though no final answer had emerged, the spirit of the work had changed. No more panic, only concentration and resolve. Atlas had shifted from being a threat into a scientific challenge, an invitation to human intellect. In universities, lecture halls overflowed with students listening intently to lessons about Atlas. Professors no longer spoke in the tones of alarm, but with the calm authority of knowledge. Treat Atlas as an equation without a solution. It is precisely the unknown that opens the door to new understanding. Students scribbled notes, debated passionately, and modeled the light signals with every tool mathematics and technology could provide. They understood they might not be the generation to solve the mystery, but that did not discourage them. On the contrary, the impossibility of the present only ignited their drive. One day, humanity would know. The media, too, adopted a different approach. Whereas in 2025 and early 2026, Atlas had been framed by fear-laden headlines, now it appeared in long-form science features. Documentaries explained in detail the observation process, the telescope technologies, and the methods used to analyze the data. People no longer watched with trembling nerves, but with steady curiosity. A man in London wrote on social media, "I used to fear Atlas, but now I just want to understand what it is." Perhaps curiosity is the most honest response. His words were shared thousands of times, a sign that the world had entered a more mature state of mind. In family living rooms, Atlas was no longer told as a bedtime terror, but as a lesson. Parents recounted to their children, "A visitor from the stars passed by, and it made the whole planet stop to look up at the sky. We did not understand it fully, but we learned how to stand firm." The children listened, eyes glowing not with fear, but with the eagerness to one day discover for themselves. From that innocent curiosity, a seed of hope sprouted. The next generation would carry on the quest for answers. By the dawn of 2027, humanity regarded Atlas with a mix of calm and longing. It was no longer seen as a menace, but as a great question mark suspended in the void. And within that question lay both the steadfast reason of science and the boundless wonder of the human heart. Atlas had gone beyond reach, but it still lingered as an invisible lighthouse, guiding humanity toward its next journey of discovery. By mid-2027, what began as scattered efforts coalesced into a global web of research networks, all orbiting a single name, Atlas. Though it had already drifted billions of kilometers away, the immense trail of data it left behind remained far from fully decoded. Laboratories across the United States, Europe, Asia, and South America joined together under a new cooperative framework called the Atlas Alliance, where every piece of information was shared instantly and transparently. For the first time in decades, humanity put aside its smaller disputes to focus on a single, unifying goal: to unravel the mystery of the interstellar visitor. Scientists entered this work with a calm resolve unlike anything before. They knew no answers would come overnight, yet that did nothing to diminish their determination. International conferences took on a new tone. Gone were the raised voices and frantic arguments of 2 years earlier. In their place came measured presentations, careful analyses, and multi-layered testing of hypotheses. Researchers no longer sought to outdo one another, but to complement each other's work. Serenity itself had become a kind of strength, allowing the collective intellect of humanity to function at its full potential. Yet beneath that composure, a thirst for knowledge still burned. Every time a fragment of new information was decoded, no matter how small, it sparked excitement across the entire community. A team in Japan noticed patterns in the light pulses resembling repeating musical notes. A group in Germany immediately compared it to heartbeats and ocean waves. Researchers in South Africa proposed that the signal might contain forms of nonlinear mathematics never before recognized. No one dared to claim certainty, but curiosity drove hypotheses to multiply. Humanity no longer feared the unknown. It had learned to treat it as fuel for imagination and discovery. Among the public, Atlas ceased to represent danger and instead became a symbol of the hunger to understand. Popular science magazines flourished, translating new research into language everyone could grasp. Ordinary people from farmers in India to college students in Brazil could follow the progress of the investigation. A wave of learning spread worldwide. Online courses in astronomy and quantum physics drew millions of enrollments. People weren't content just to read headlines. They wanted to understand for themselves, to explore with their own minds. Curiosity spilled out of the laboratories and into daily life, turning Atlas into a beacon of humanity's shared desire for knowledge. For the younger generation in particular, Atlas became a rallying cry. New cohorts of students no longer saw the study of space as a distant fantasy, but as a tangible career path. Many declared majors in astronomy, data science, and artificial intelligence fields expected to play key roles in deciphering the interstellar mystery. Some universities called this movement the Atlas Wave, likening it to the Apollo effect, but on a scale far more global. This was not about one nation planting its flag, but about humanity as a whole reaching outward together. By the middle of 2027, Atlas had become the invisible glue binding billions of people. Rational calm allowed the world to study it as a scientific object, while relentless curiosity kept the planet's gaze fixed upon it. Even as Atlas receded beyond reach, it remained present a promise that the secrets of the cosmos were always waiting, and that humanity, with intellect and patience, would never stop moving toward them. By the end of 2027, research projects centered on Atlas began producing results that left both the scientific community and the public surprised, yet calm in their reception. No longer were there breathless press conferences like 2 years earlier. Instead, announcements came in the form of detailed publications, written in precise, measured language. But within that calm, a deeper fire of curiosity burned brighter than ever. Atlas, though tens of billions of kilometers away, still occupied humanity's thoughts, as if it were hovering right above the sky. A research team in California published findings that the 131-second light sequence was far more complex than anyone had imagined. Within millions of signals recorded, they discovered segments that repeated with near-perfect ratios like a hidden common denominator running through the entire sequence. While many dismissed it as a statistical anomaly, others raised the question, could this be evidence of some kind of encoded system? The question no longer unleashed panic as it once might have. Instead, it was met with calm, rational analysis. Humanity had learned to face big hypotheses without fear, though in their eyes, a glimmer of irrepressible curiosity remained. In Europe, another team used artificial intelligence to compare Atlas's signals with billions of natural waveforms on Earth, from heartbeats and neural pulses to seismic vibrations and ocean waves. The results were startling. Some parts of the signal showed high similarity to neural rhythms found in the human brain. Although no scientific explanation has yet been established, the finding quickly became a topic of debate. Researchers carefully noted, there is no evidence Atlas possesses consciousness. But the public could not help but wonder, if the resemblance was not a coincidence, could Atlas carry within it something beyond human imagination? Meanwhile, in Asia, a group of mathematicians proposed that the 131-second light pattern might represent a form of mathematics unknown to us. They described it as a kind of geometric language, of which we had only glimpsed the surface. Rather than being dismissed, the hypothesis was met with steady enthusiasm. No one claimed certainty, but all agreed it was worth exploring further. Curiosity had matured. It was no longer a reckless impulse, but a patient drive, fueling step-by-step progress, however small, yet steady. The public followed these developments with a new mindset. They no longer trembled at each new announcement. They listened, analyzed, and discussed. Television programs invited experts to explain the discoveries, and viewers tuned in not to await a shocking headline, but to feel part of a collective journey of exploration. A student in Brazil posted online, "I know Atlas is far away, but I feel like I'm traveling alongside it." Tens of thousands shared the post, as if declaring that curiosity itself had become the glue binding the planet together. By year's end, it was clear that Atlas was no longer just a celestial body that had passed by. It had become a spiritual project for humanity as a whole. Calmly, people continued to build models, eliminate false leads, and strengthen the foundations of knowledge. Yet even within that steady pace, the thirst for discovery remained visible, flaring up whenever a new clue appeared. Atlas, though distant, had planted within humanity something indelible, the patience to search and the relentless drive to never stop asking questions. At the beginning of 2028, Atlas had drifted beyond the reach of most telescopes. On orbital charts, it was reduced to nothing more than a faint dot, sliding farther and farther toward the edge of the solar system. For many, its disappearance from the sky brought a quiet pang of nostalgia. Yet within the scientific community, and among the public, the mood was different. Neither panic nor illusion, but a steady calm. Humanity accepted that it might take decades, even centuries, to truly understand Atlas, and in that acceptance, patience itself became a symbol of a new stage of maturity. International scientific reports continued to be released, compiling every finding of the past 3 years. All of them admitted the same reality. The 131-second sequence of light still had no explanation. There was no convincing evidence that it was artificial, yet the possibility could not be fully dismissed. Rather than sowing division, this uncertainty became the foundation of a new attitude. Humanity chose to live with an unanswered question while refusing to stop searching. It was no longer a frantic impatience, but a kind of intellectual composure, like sitting before a massive book, knowing it might take generations to read in full. At international forums, many scientists likened Atlas to the key to a great door that humanity had only just brushed with its fingertips. A Japanese astronomer remarked, "The important thing is not to decode it right away, but that we have learned to cooperate, to ask the right questions, and to be patient. The statement was quoted widely, embraced as a declaration of the calm spirit of the era. Yet even within that composure, another current flowed, curiosity that never ceased. Thousands of small projects pressed on, from orbital simulations to decoding attempts with new algorithms. Every small clue sparked renewed desire to explore, like embers glowing steadily in a long night. For the public, Atlas gradually settled into cultural memory. Museums displayed replicas of their data, and schools wove the story into their curricula. But unlike the haunting obsession of earlier years, Atlas now appeared in people's minds as a quiet reminder. We do not know everything, and that is natural. Children learned that curiosity was not a weakness, but a strength. Adults came to see that patience in the face of mystery was the quality that had allowed humanity to endure. And in every heart, one question still whispered, what was Atlas, truly? That question no longer haunted like a shadow, but stood as a lighthouse guiding the desire to discover. As 2028 unfolded, it became clear that Atlas had moved on, but its echoes remained. More than that, it had been etched into history as a milestone marking humanity's growth. From fear and panic to pride and unity, and finally to calm rationality. It reminded us that the universe remains full of mysteries, but we need not tremble before them. Instead, we can approach them with intellect, with curiosity that never dies, and with the belief that the journey of seeking will continue across generations. Atlas was not merely a distant celestial body. It had become a symbol of composure and the will to explore, two qualities that now walked side by side, carrying humanity into a new era of knowledge. By the end of 2028, as winter blanketed the great cities, 3I divided by Atlas had travelled so far that no telescope on Earth could follow it directly anymore. It slipped beyond sight, yet not beyond memory. In its absence, Atlas became more present than ever, an emblem, a metaphor, a ceaseless echo within humanity's collective mind. From New York to Tokyo, from Cairo to Buenos Aires, people looked up at night skies no longer marked by the pulsing blue glow, and yet, in the silence, they felt it was still out there, moving patiently onward, unhurried, unexpectant, needing no farewell. After the surging storms of emotion, humanity finally paused to reflect. No longer were people arguing about whether Atlas was natural or artificial, no longer haunted by visions of annihilation. Instead, the questions turned philosophical. What does this experience mean for us? A philosopher in Paris wrote, Atlas is a mirror. It reflects our fears, it reflects our longings, and ultimately, it reflects the truth. We are a species capable of growing through uncertainty. His words spread widely, quoted in classrooms, in newspapers, in public forums. Atlas was no longer just a celestial body, but a milestone marking humanity's spiritual maturity. In everyday culture, this reflection seeped quietly, like an underground current. People wrote poems, composed songs, painted canvases, filmed movies about Atlas as if writing about a friend who had departed. On social media, millions shared a simple phrase, Atlas is still traveling. Those 4 words became a mantra for an entire generation. The cosmic journey continues, and we are but small spectators in an endless play. Yet instead of stirring unease, the phrase brought peace. People realized that not being able to control Atlas's path was not a failure, it was simply the truth. And accepting that truth was itself a step toward maturity. In sacred spaces, Atlas became a shared language across religions. In Rome, priests called it God's anonymous messenger. In Mecca, believers saw it as proof of creation's vastness. Across Asia, monks taught that Atlas was like a cosmic bell, striking every 131 seconds to awaken humanity to impermanence. Worshippers left those ceremonies with lighter spirits. They no longer asked what Atlas was, they asked themselves, how have I changed after witnessing it? Within those questions, a new inspiration quietly emerged. People began to slow down, to pay more attention to their ties with one another. Grassroots movements spread tree planting, protecting the environment, and sharing food with the poor. All were launched under a simple banner, Atlas has gone, but we remain. Behind that phrase lies an affirmation of responsibility. We cannot control distant celestial bodies, but we can control how we live, how we love, and how we nurture hope here on Earth. Through its disappearance, Atlas had sown the seeds of contemplation. And from that contemplation flowed a quiet inspiration, the drive to keep learning, to live more humanely, to find peace even amid uncertainty. On those cold winter nights of 2028, when the skies no longer carried a streak of blue light, humanity discovered something simple yet profound. Sometimes the silence of the universe is itself the most beautiful invitation for us to look inward, to reflect, and to keep nurturing hope for the days to come. The year 2029 opened not with a new cosmic event, but with the enduring resonance of the reflections Atlas had left behind. Its absence had transformed into an invisible presence within the spiritual life of humankind. Journalists called it the Atlas Decade, for even though it could no longer be observed, that celestial traveller still shaped how people thought, created, and acted. From research institutes to classrooms, from concert halls to community forums, its echo lingered everywhere, Atlas like a distant heartbeat, urging humanity to live more slowly, to reflect more deeply, and to trust more fully. In the arts, the Atlas era erupted into an unprecedented wave of creativity. In Berlin, galleries overflowed with visitors drawn to paintings that reimagined the 131-second light, not as random codes, but as meditative circles, symbols of the invisible bond between humankind and the cosmos. In New York, a symphony orchestra performed Eternal Atlas in 4 movements: awe, fear, hope, peace. The audience sat in silence, many closing their eyes to feel the arc of emotion humanity had endured. And when the piece ended in a radiant chord, applause thundered, as if the entire hall were crying out together, "We have grown." Philosophy and religion also found in Atlas an inexhaustible well of inspiration. Existential philosophers emphasized that Atlas demonstrated both the smallness and the greatness of humankind, small before the immensity of the universe, yet extraordinary, in daring to lift its head and gaze directly into the mystery. Theologians regarded Atlas as evidence of a sacred language, of which humanity had only heard the opening note. In temples and cathedrals alike, sermons invoked Atlas as a symbol of humility and faith. And strangely enough, though each faith offered its own interpretation, all agreed on one shared seed sown by the experience: the conviction that humanity is not alone, and that meaning can be found even within the unknown. In science, reflection matured into steady action. International collaborations carried on, but with a gentler tone. They were no longer frantic races for immediate answers, but long-term programs, patient and deliberate, like planting seeds for the generations to come. A massive data center was established and named the Atlas Archive, preserving every signal collected so that future descendants could continue the work. A young scientist in India remarked, "We don't need the answer today. What matters is that we preserve the question for tomorrow." His words were met with wide acclaim, for they captured a new attitude, accepting the unknown while never relinquishing curiosity. In social life, the echoes of Atlas laid the foundation for movements of peace and connection. In many countries, schools held Global Atlas Day, when students turned off the lights, looked together at the night sky, and shared their dreams. On social media, the hashtag number #StillWalkingAtlas spread like wildfire. People posted stories of personal hardships they had overcome, paired with images of the night sky, as if reminding each other that the journey continues. Simple words such as, "I didn't give up, because Atlas is still traveling," were shared millions of times, forming a powerful current of collective spirit. By 2029, Atlas was no longer a cold block of ice drifting in space. It had become a flame of inspiration burning in humanity's heart. It gave people peace when they looked back, hope when they looked forward, and above all, a reason to live more kindly with one another. Atlas did not need to be present to exert influence. It was precisely its absence that made its presence eternal. By the end of 2029, as winter's frost once again blanketed rooftops, Atlas had vanished from every astronomical chart, reduced now to nothing more than a symbol in vast databases. And yet, its disappearance did not create emptiness. It opened a new space for imagination and reflection. People could no longer see it with their eyes, but they still saw it in memory. And that memory, after 4 tumultuous years, had matured into what many began calling the spiritual legacy of Atlas, a chapter woven into the human story. Across the planet, Atlas had become a shared language, transcending borders. A child in South Africa wrote in an essay, "Atlas feels like an invisible friend who taught me that silence can also carry lessons." In Canada, a circle of writers gathered to publish a collection titled Letters to Atlas, featuring hundreds of voices from around the world. Some wrote with gratitude, others with longing, but all carried a single thread. Atlas had changed the way they lived, slower, deeper, and richer in hope. In art, Atlas emerged as an immortal icon. A new museum in Tokyo unveiled works inspired by its passage, ranging from abstract blue-toned paintings to sculptures echoing the steady rhythm of 131 seconds. Visitors entered not with trembling fear but with quiet smiles, as if hearing a familiar piece of music. These creations did not aim to replicate Atlas precisely, but to stir a feeling, the sense that humanity could transform fear into art, uncertainty into meaning. In science, calmness and hope had fused into one. International projects continued steadily, unhurried by deadlines. Scientists accepted that they might not live long enough to see an answer, yet they persevered. They archived data, building foundations for the generations to come. At a conference in Chile, a young researcher declared, "Atlas does not demand that we answer right away. It only demands that we hold on to the question." His words became a new credo. Science is not merely about finding answers, but about learning to live with the unknown, carried by the trust that one day, human intellect will unravel it. The public embraced Atlas as a quiet reminder. Each year, small gatherings took place in many places, called Atlas Nights. On these nights, people turned off their lights, sat together under the sky, and recalled where they were, what they thought, and how they felt when the 131-second light first appeared. No panic, only peace and hope. These nights became moments of collective remembrance, reminding one another that even in a vast and silent universe, meaning can still be found simply by looking upward together. As 2029 drew to a close, humanity recognized that Atlas was not merely an astronomical event, but a spiritual chapter. It had taught reflection, sparked creativity, offered peace, and planted seeds of hope. It had turned anxiety into creative power, silence into language, and a distant block of ice into a symbol of connection. Out there in the infinite dark, Atlas still journeyed on. And here on the blue planet, humanity also continued its journey, now carrying with it a new light, the light of faith that even in the darkest night, hope can still be kindled.